Good afternoon. Welcome to today's licensing hearing panel. I shall take the first item on the agenda, which is the election of a chairman.
Thank you, Chair. If we can have nominations for chairman.
I nominate Councillor Chambers.
And is that seconded?
Seconded.
Welcome, Councillor Chambers.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. I understand that Councillor Brown is unwell and therefore is not here. May I sign the minutes of this meeting outside the meeting?
Yes.
Agreed? Thank you. I have no urgent matter at this particular time. Are there any declarations?
No.
Then that brings us to why we're here this afternoon, which is an application for a premises licence in respect of the Great Lines Heritage Park. I'm advised that there is a supplementary agenda which has been submitted and that both parties would like to address us in relation to this item. So,
yes, it's Stuart Jessup. I'm the legal representative of Kent Police, and it's right that I start explaining about that supplementary material. The material covers statements from a police officer and a licensing officer from another local authority. It covers three areas, and they are broadly transport and the management of transport. Secondly, the proximity of the event to an area which is subject to a cumulative impact policy, and it's in that zone, and therefore the proximity of that to an area of high crime. And the third area that those Better? Yeah. And the third area that the material covers is this applicant's festival in March, I think it's March or May last year, the middle of last year, in another area, and goes to whether there were problems at that venue which might not have been improved upon so that they may repeat here. So they're the three areas. They are not any areas that are new because they are the three major categories of concerns that were in the original representations. All they do is provide more detail to assist the committee in terms of understanding those representations that are already there. So there's no ambush, there's nothing new. And these are matters that have already been raised in conversations, in meetings between those who I represent, the police officers, and the applicant's team. Indeed, they met this week, and issues such as those three categories were discussed. So we say it's all part and parcel of matters that may well assist you in your deliberations in due course.
thank you. Mr. Colvin.
Good afternoon, councillors. Well, this material came in at 3 o'clock yesterday. I have a solicitor from Manchester, I'm in London, my client is in other places, so it's been highly inconvenient to have to deal with it, and a little bit depressing that what it covered was a different event altogether about 8 months ago in Lydd. We've looked at the material. What I don't want to do is to stop a party coming to a hearing, putting in what they want you to see, but I will be asking you to keep your eyes firmly focused on this particular heritage park in Gillingham. So I'm not going to resist it going in. We'll just take a lot of time arguing about it. I will make some brief comment on it during the course of my submissions, but of course I'll be focused on the matter before you, which is this proposal for this licence in your park. So I don't want to take up your time with procedural argument.
Thank you. Colleagues, do you wish to take this in?
Yeah.
On the basis that my colleagues have not yet seen this material, I would propose that we have a 15-minute break while we consider it. At least read it, I should say. Thank you.
issue here is that we're dealing with the Great Lines Heritage Park this May. At 3 o'clock yesterday, the police have put in a raft of material regarding Lydd Airport last May. That material consists, amongst other things, of 2 statements from people who are licensing specialists, not officers, of Folkestone Hythe Council, which say some quite negative things, which were not reported to my client at the time, and which did not form part of the actual debrief, which was required by the licence, at which in many respects my clients were complimented on their management of the event. Well, you can't, if you're going to put this material in, you've got to put it all in. You can't just cherry pick the negative parts and leave out of the process altogether the minutes which have been served yesterday. And if the negative stuff is going to go in, I will be making reference to the minutes, which paint my client in quite a complimentary light in various respects, but not all respects. So I have to say it either all goes in or it doesn't all go in, but we can't have half and half. I do repeat, I didn't want to waste time over this, but we've got to be eyes focused forward on the planning for this event in the Great Lines Heritage Park. And this is part of what happens when only tangentially relevant material is introduced the very day before a hearing which has been in the diary for quite some time.
It would appear to me, hearing these dissents between both parties, it possibly would be safer, and I just checked with this colleague, we just reject this supplementary, that we will totally reject this supplementary item, as it seems to be causing more problems than it's solving.
Thank you.
Well,
Sorry, can I check? Let's clarify what you're rejecting here.
Bearing in mind that
Yeah, the microphone just needs the button pressed once to come on.
Just clarify what you're rejecting.
that we will not take it into consideration, bearing in mind the arguments which are going on, and we will continue with the hearing.
yeah, I do really, because the reason.
Sorry, can I just come and collect these?
Yes, okay.
Yes, I just wish to say this. It's important. I know Mr. Colvin, King's Counsel, has addressed this in a broad brush, that the information is all of the same type and from the same origin, but that's not the case. Can I just be specific about what is there? Because if you're making a ruling in respect of all of it, you have to know whether all of it falls under the umbrella just being discussed, and it doesn't. There is a statement from Mr. PC Hunt, which doesn't deal with this previous incident at all. It's completely separate, and it deals with other issues raised by him in the representations about this particular event, so not the previous event. So I would ask you to consider that on its own merit. Then there is another statement from a Mr. Liddell, I think it is, who's the licensing officer. That does contain information about a previous event, and that does reference the exhibits. I can see and concede that there may be a difficulty with that statement if the exhibit, the minutes are not adduced before you. But there's a third statement from a PC Martin, and that is a police officer, not specialist licensing officer of the local authority. And that police officer was at the last event, and that police officer doesn't produce those exhibits, but deals with her direct first-hand experience of that event and describes how she says that the operator, the same operator as in this particular application, performed at that event only a few months ago in relation to a similar type of event with less numbers, and we would suggest that that is relevant and doesn't cause the mischief of the other third statement, which obviously refers to minutes of which belong to a local authority that haven't given permission for those minutes to be published. But those other two statements don't offend that principle at all. There's no reason on that basis to refuse to admit it. And I think Mr. Colvin at the beginning has said that he doesn't make any submissions to that effect. It's only in relation, as I understand it, to, I think it's Mr. Liddell's, the licensing authority officers, and his reference to the exhibits, that there's a problem. In which case, I would ask you to make a ruling in respect of that particular part of the material only, and not the statements of Mr. Hunt, who sits next to me in any case and doesn't deal with the previous incident, and PC Martin, who does deal with the previous incident, but deals with it through her own experiences without referencing the minutes.
Okay, so I think at the beginning of this, you both agreed for this bundle to come in, all right? So the issue, in reality, that we are, in terms of the local authority stipulating, is that the SAG debrief meeting, which forms part of your bundle, your supplementary, it's the view of the local authority that this is not exempt. In other words, it will be published if it comes in. And if you're content with that, then we can go back to the beginning, can't we?
I thought we had a ruling. I don't really want to add to the ruling, but in broad terms, and actually what I was rather hoping wouldn't happen is now happening. It's Friday afternoon. We're really troubled by the lid material going in. I was hoping that we could just deal with it in 5 minutes, and it's a different event. It's some while ago. I'm introducing what's happening in relation to our event, which we are concerned with. If any of this goes in, then we've got to have the opportunity to be able to go into the lid event in a little bit of detail to explain some of the background, and we will take up an hour of the committee's time this afternoon with going over the detail about an event which they're not concerned with, under a license from another authority that has not been reviewed, where there was an event debrief where everyone said, and we look forward to seeing you next year. So what on earth we need to take up time with? I just don't know. The only other thing that Ms. Jessup has said is that there's a statement from PC Hunt which says, oh, but Gillingham's a cumulative impact area and a PSPO as well, and which we accept, and we don't think it's relevant because this isn't in the CIP or the PSPO, but he can make his points that Gillingham High Street is a high crime area and the police don't want a festival on its doorstep. All those points can be made. We don't need to go through the detail of pie charts and data, etc. And if we were going to be asked to, it should have come in quite a while ago so that we could look at it. So I don't mind Mr. Jessup saying, look, there's a CIP and a PSPO next door, and we can have the debate about it. But I do think that we're in danger of wasting a lot of time this afternoon about material which is, at the very best, tangential to what the subcommittee has got to consider. And I'm rather hoping that the subcommittee will just stick to the ruling which is just made. That it's not going to look at this further material.
I'm clear because there was an initial ruling to allow it in. Is your position essentially now that you're content with the second ruling ultimately, which was that it shouldn't be contained?
We're just going to get into a lot of argument about this material.
So you're obviously you've made your representation that you think it ought to be included. You're essentially saying it shouldn't be included, and that's a matter for the bench.
The subcommittee has literally just ruled. Mr. Jessup has tried to undo the ruling. The subcommittee has literally just ruled.
To be fair, there were two rulings. One was initially to allow the material in, and then we came to the issue as to the SAG debrief, which was, in our view, not exempt from being published. You've then come back to us to say, well, actually, it shouldn't be. It should be exempt. And the position of the local authority, to make it clear, is that it is not exempt material. The second ruling then came, which was to say that the material is not to be included whatsoever. So ultimately, it's a question of really what the actual ruling is, whether you're allowing the material in full.
Yeah, well, I thought that the
Yeah.
ruling was that it shouldn't be allowed in, and indeed all the papers have just been collected from the parties.
My colleague is wishing.
Yeah, Chair, it is quite an uncomfortable moment, isn't it, really, because we did agree to, you know, we haven't looked at the supplementary agenda. We read all these papers, we read them very thoroughly, and with all due respect, Mr Colvin, what we find a waste of time or not is deemed to us when we read papers, so I hope, you know, we would look at that. However, the Chair had made that ruling because we haven't read the paperwork. We were going to adjourn for the 15 minutes because we want to take time. Our legal advisor is making a very clear point around you either have the full pack, which I agree, being published, or you don't. So that's where we are with regards to disregarding that pack. If am I right? If the party does not want the whole pack published, then we go with the Chair's decision of just disregarding that pack and get on with the hearing. Is that where I'm at, Chair?
Thank you.
If I can just hopefully end it all here. Given what's been said, and given the fact that we are adamant that part of it that references the minutes should not be published, we don't want that published. That would be against those who are concerned with the minutes, instructions and wishes. And if it can't be split, as I'm hearing the ruling is the case that it can't be split, then in which case we accept that ruling.
Okay, on that basis then we proceed. Can I ask you first, I'm sure you all have the papers for this afternoon. Some of you have been here more often, but you will know that we have a guidelines here as to how we operate, and we try to stick to that. So I'm going to ask Mr. De Fazio to tell us why we're here.
Thank you. Stardust Festivals Limited has applied for the grant of a premises licence in respect of the Great Lines Heritage Park, Brompton Road, Gillingham, Kent. The matter has been brought before you to determine as there are unresolved representations from Kent Police. The application is for films, plays, live and recorded music and the performance of dance for the following hours: Friday 1700 to 2200 hours, Saturday 11 to 22:30 hours, Sunday 10:30 to 18:30 hours, and Monday 10:30 to 18:30 hours. In addition, the licensable activities are to include the sale of alcohol for the following hours: Friday 1700 to 21:45, Saturday 1100 to 22 hours, Sunday 1400 to 21:30, and Monday 10:30 to 18:30 hours. A copy of the application as submitted is at Appendix A, which is page 11. A location plan for the site is at Appendix B, page 27. Additional documents have been provided and form part of this application. These documents include a full list of volunteered conditions and conditions agreed between the Environmental Protection Team and the applicant at Appendix C, page 29. A noise management plan at Appendix D, which is page 37, and an event safety management plan, which is attached to item 7. Please note that the proposed licensable activities for the Monday were not included in the initial application, and so are missing from the initial application form at Appendix A. I was made aware that the event was to last 4 days and include Monday, but due to an oversight from me, this clarification to the application was not passed to the responsible authorities until the 22nd of December. I apologise for this. However, reference to the event lasting 4 days was made in the volunteered conditions, the noise management plan and the event safety management plan that were circulated to the responsible authorities. I can confirm that the application has been correctly advertised in the local press and notices displayed on the premises for the required period. A copy of the blue notice placed around the location can be found at Appendix E, which is page 67. Police representation application can be found at Appendix F, which is page 69, and the applicant's response can be found at Appendix G, page 79. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. de Vazio. Right, we come to the applicant. Is that going to be you, Mr. Jessup, or PC Hunt? No, I'm so sorry. My apologies.
Well, councillors, as you've just heard, this is an application for a 4-day festival at the Great Lines Heritage Park for the second May Bank holiday weekend. Subject to your licence, it'll run like this. On Friday the 26th of May, the opera singer Catherine Jenkins will perform. The event will finish at 9:45. And there'll be a capacity for that event, and I hope ticketing for that event, of 5,000 people. On Saturday, there will be a dance event, which will finish at 10 p.m. with a capacity of 25,000 people. And there will be the usual array of bars, food concessions, and fairground rides. On Sunday, there will be a music event consisting of 80s, 90s, and what is now called noughties dance music, which will finish at 9:30 with a capacity of 15,000 people. And Monday is planned to be a family community day, finish at 6 p.m, capacity of 15,000, arts and crafts, food, fairground rides, and a children's disco. Obviously, all of these events contribute and combine to create a diverse mix, and I can tell you that all are needed to support the whole economically. The only reason we're here today is that the police, alone amongst Medway residents, all parts of this council, politicians, other authorities, other agencies, the police alone have objected. I want to make it clear that while we consider their objection to be somewhat misconceived, my client is intent that it will be working in partnership with the police to be delivering this event. It's essential that the police are part of the team which helps plan and deliver events of this nature. So nothing I say should be taken to imply anything other than a commitment to working properly in concert with the police. Can I take a step back? The UK is famous for its festivals. It's one of the things we do very well. There are approximately 700 a year, and they are part of the cultural fabric of the nation. They are a tourist draw. They contribute to the annual cycle of celebrations and entertainments within communities, and they contribute to local economies. They support local musicians. They provide work and experience for local people, including young people. And they contribute to local supply lines of goods and services. In this particular case, subject to your licence, about 50 local traders would be involved in providing concessions on the site. About 20 local bands would have the opportunity to perform. And in year one, at least 25% of the jobs on site, and there'll be about 1,000 jobs on site, will be local people, and that would build as the festival takes root in years to come. The process for mounting festivals is now very well established in this country. There's a process of site selection and commercial agreement, usually but not always with a local authority. Glastonbury, for example, isn't a local authority, it's a local farmer. A safety advisory group is formed with all the relevant disciplines. Safety advisory groups had their origin in planning for football, but it's now the standard way of planning for large spectator events. By all the relevant disciplines, I mean statutory authorities and non-statutory authorities who are involved in getting people to and from the event, protecting local residents, getting people away safely, and making sure that the event passes off peacefully. Working subgroups report to the Safety Advisory Group. Risks are identified and assessed, and plans are made to mitigate them, and those plans obviously are written. And the plans, which cover all elements of the festival, transport, noise, health, welfare, crime, disorder, etc., all of those plans are compiled into a Bible known as the Event Safety Management Plan, ESMP, or sometimes EMP for short. Routinely, that plan is iterative, and so documents go back and forth with the Safety Advisory Group, and routinely the ESMP is completed round about a month before the event takes place. It's then signed off by the Safety Advisory Group or the SAG, and then it is stuck to. Crucially, until the ESMP is agreed, the event cannot and does not proceed. Nothing is left to chance. The event occurs. Statutory authorities are usually on site in an event liaison team, or ELT for short. The police may join the organiser in the control room to ensure that any issues are picked up and responded to, and to ensure that the whole service is correlated and delivered in a coherent and safe manner. And after the event, there is a debrief, so that learnings are identified and then applied in the following year. And that is exactly what is happening in this case. There's no difference between how this event is being planned and how events all over the country are being planned simultaneously. Now, within that process, of course, there needs to be a licence application, at least in year one. But of course, at the moment the licence is granted, the licensing subcommittee is concerned to ensure that the process is happening correctly and any proportionate overall controls are applied. It's not trying itself to approve the event management plan, which in the nature of things will not finally be signed off by the Safety Advisory Group until about a month before the festival. And indeed, in multi-year licence applications, of course, the licensing authority isn't trying to sign off every jot and tittle of the festival for 2024 and 2025. It's trying to put in place a framework within which these controls are applied. Now, all parties to the Safety Advisory Group are satisfied with the progress which is being made, except, seemingly, the police. Just to colour this in a little bit, to take one of their objections, The gate into the park, you might know the gate, it's a slab of concrete with the name of the park on it. The gate into the park, that opening, is only a couple of metres wide. So they've said, well, how are you going to get 25,000 people through that? And that is the sort of question which could be raised in a SAG, in a Safety Advisory Group meeting, and dealt with in about 15 seconds. Are you intending to pass 25,000 people through that gap? Answer, no. As you can see from the plans, there will be multiple lanes and gates into the site. But what about the low Gabion wall, which fronts on Brompton Road? Well, there are steps being built over the Gabion wall so that you can get proper queuing, multiple queues through the gates. Thank you very much. Now we understand it. So I do hope that the police will find their participation on the Safety Advisory Group helpful. I hope that it will help to allay their concerns. I don't know, they may even to some degree find it an educational experience. But those are the sorts of objections they've raised. I've taken a rather extreme one, but those are the sorts of things which are dealt with through the SAG process. What I'm going to do now is just to set out the process in a bit more detail and then spend a few minutes dealing with some of the other police concerns. But I hope that once they've heard the presentation, they might want to review their position to some degree. And as you've been told, the police representations are on page 72. They've set it all out. And our reply, which is point by point, starts on page 79. And then following that, there's the first iteration of an event safety management plan, which goes on from pages 89 to 486. You will be glad to know that I'm only going to dip very briefly into that first draft EMP. Let's look at page 79. As you can see, conversations with Medway Council first started in July of last year. Different sites were considered in partnership with the Council's festival and events team, led by Miss Claire Horan, who is an extremely experienced local government officer specialising in festival and events. Initially, Medway suggested 3 sites for consideration, but agreement was reached in relation to Great Lines in October of last year. The reason that both parties considered that Great Lines was the best site was because of its urban location and therefore links, and because Great Lines has experience of running large events, as you will know. The event was approved in principle by Medway Council in October of 2022. And the Council's deputy leader and deputy CEO, who's also the director of Place here, stated at the time that my client's proposal aligns with the Council's ambitions for a festival of this size and scale in Medway, expecting benefits to residents through jobs and work experience, showcasing local talent and working with local suppliers and businesses. And following sign-off, my client has obviously continued to deal with Ms. Horan over the process for planning for these events. There was an early traffic subgroup, as you can see from page 79. I think it goes back to the 8th of November. My client met ward councillors so as to keep them informed. There were 2 public consultation events in addition to the statutory consultation. As part of that extra statutory consultation, my client leafleted 2,000 local homes and has conducted 2 engagement meetings, one at Gillingham Library on the 7th of December and the following day online. And a number of SAG meetings have been occurring, involving all the relevant disciplines. And there have been early traffic subgroups, not involving guesses about what will happen. It's all data-driven. There's been a transport use forecast, a management plan, and a traffic survey and impact assessment leading to an early draft traffic management plan. And all of that work is improved as ticket sales occur, because you can begin to assign postcodes to where all the ticket purchases are. And you can also find out, obviously, by putting on sale bus journeys to Great Lines from further afield, you can actually begin to make plans for what needs to happen where. Obviously, everything continues at the same pace, as you can see at page 79 and 78. There are many meetings to come, and the process which will be followed is the standard process for the planning of festivals. I can tell you that the planning process is extremely well on track. It is well advanced. Your SAG and subgroup authorities are working effectively in partnership. For example, let me take transport. My client is expecting to sign off the transport plan with your transport authority at the end of next month, 3 months before this event even takes place. As a result of this consultation and engagement, I can tell you that there is no objection by any local resident whatsoever. There's no objection by any ward councillor. There's no objection by the licensing authority or the highways authority. As you know, there's some important buildings in the vicinity of Great Lines, including 2 schools and a hospital and military, the MOD facility. There was no representation from any other local stakeholders, including Medway Hospital, Brompton Barracks, Friends of the Great Lines, or Mid-Kent College. And I should say that my client is working in particular with the hospital and the MOD to ensure that the event passes off successfully from their point of view. The Friday event doesn't start until later to make sure that the schools are out by the time the event starts. As you know, Environmental Health put in a representation, and my client engaged with Environmental Health and submitted a noise management plan from Vanguardia, who are the leading national noise consultancy in the UK. And as a result, agreement has been reached about noise production, about noise monitoring in 10 locations around the site to make sure that everything is happening within tolerances, with special rules in relation to the hospital, and so on. Agreement has been reached and the representation has been withdrawn. And that's the kind of partnership working involving identification and resolution of issues, which is appreciated and helps events like this happen without the need for any contention at all. Working with the council, my client will be giving away 11,000 tickets to the value of £300,000 to the Ministry of Defence, hospital staff, council staff, and local residents. So, for example, on the Saturday, 250 tickets will be allocated to residents by ballot, and all of this is a standard way of building a relationship with local stakeholders and expressing appreciation for the hospitality of Gillingham in receiving this festival into its midst in one of its great historic spaces, which is a space much appreciated by people playing sports, people informally relaxing, people walking dogs and so forth. My client is totally aware that there's a level of imposition and wants to ensure that the impact is as small as possible and that appreciation is demonstrated. Now, from there, I just want to say a little bit more about the detailed controls on events of this nature, which we are asking you to sign off. It's worth looking at the conditions on page 29 of your bundle. And in the introduction, right at the beginning, you can see that my client is committed to participate in a regime of partnership, working with the RAs, the whole planning group meetings, additional meetings with Kent Police, ad hoc meetings with other RAs, attend scheduled Medway Council SAG meetings. Medway calls the SAG, that's the way it happens, to update the group on the event planning process. 2, limits the number of events. 3 is the timeline in relation to SAGs. 5, commits my client to working in partnership with SAG. I'm not going to take you through every condition. 7, the premises licence holder should appoint a member of the management team to prepare and implement the plans included in the EMP. So it's not just a question of having a plan and putting it in a filing cabinet. The plans are there for implementation. And then, very importantly, you set a framework for what goes into this Bible of documents, and there are 29 documents which have to be produced. You end up with a big book of plans, which my client has then got to deliver, and it's a full range of every possible risk is then identified, controlled for, mitigated, and the mitigations are delivered. 9 is more timing. 10 says that the final draft ESMP has to be presented 28 days ahead, and there shan't be any further amendments unless directly approved by the licensing authority. 12 is the debrief. 13 obviously admits all the authorities onto site. 14 is about local consultation. And then each of the licensing objectives is dealt with. 15, the crowd management plan. Just as an example, that plan has to be implemented. There has to be a crime reduction plan. The numbers and deployments of on-site and off-site security personnel shall be agreed by the SAG prior to the event and including the SMP. And I mention that because the police said, oh yes, but what about off-site security? The answer is that when you sit down in the crime and security group, programmed for the 3rd of February, the police will say, now look here, were you aware that there's a dark alley there, or there's a vulnerable street or whatever here? What's the proposal? And that's where these things are hacked through and numbers are agreed, and my client will ensure that all the security arrangements on-site and off-site are there, paid for by my client, and the parties will be working in concert to ensure that security takes place properly, both on and off-site. 19, drugs and search policy. 20 is very important. You probably read the newspapers and watch the television, and you will have children and grandchildren. You will know that drugs are there in society. They're in pubs and clubs, and they're around large spectator events. My client will be operating a strictly no drugs policy. And I'll take you to a bit more about that in a second. There will be an enhanced search tent where you can do more intimate searches if you're worried that someone's trying to bring in drugs. 22, there'll be notices explaining that people will be removed if they're found in possession of drugs. There'll be amnesty bins where people can deposit drugs on before they get to the site at all. That is standard at every UK festival. 26, very importantly, there'll be a 3-metre high steel shield fence erected around the perimeter of the event. And that means that people can't sneak under or over, and people can't pass things under or through. So it'll make the place a safe place, and so forth. That's all I really want to say about crime and disorder. It's all there to be read. And then there are rules about public safety. And I think I can just pass through most of that. But if you look at condition 45, there will be an event safety officer to oversee the build, live event, and de-rig. And if you look at what the event safety officer has to do, it's a great deal of stuff, including the infrastructural matters, but also the health and welfare matters, including adequate provision of medical facilities, people with special needs, crowd management, occupancy levels, and so forth. So that's a very important role in the overall delivery of this event. 48, obviously, there's a fire safety management plan. There needs to be a fire risk assessment. One of the police objections is, oh, there may be some long grass on an adjoining field, which I understand is there for biodiversity reasons. And of course, that's very good. And so, of course, my client is liaising with your fire authority to make sure that its fire risk assessment does what it ought to do to protect against that risk. That's the ordinary course of event planning. 52, there's some point by the police that maybe some parts of the site might not be lit. Well, of course, everything will be lit, and there'll be a lighting plan, and that has to be signed off by the SAG. And 53, the whole site is under the surveillance of CCTV. And then there's plans for prevention of public nuisance, 54 onwards. And as you know, that's now agreed. 63, the premises licence holder is to appoint an experienced transport and traffic consultant to develop an appropriate transport and traffic management plan, including modelling, attendance and egress, public transport, queuing, etc. And the transport and traffic management plan shall be agreed with the SAG. Well, my client has already complied with that. It asks for Medway's recommendation as to the appropriate senior transport planner. Medway recommended last mile in the person of Ben Jones. I think he must be sitting behind me because he's... Oh, there he is at the end. Last mile are one of the most senior transport consultancies in the country. They're responsible for delivering events at Rochester Castle. They're also responsible for delivering events for some of the largest event producers in this country, including Live Nation, Festival Republic, Broadwick, and so forth, and have delivered many, many of the largest and most important and most prestigious music and other spectator events that this country holds on an annual basis. And he is well advanced with his work, and he's working closely with your transport team, who are perfectly happy with the way things are going. I might ask Ben just to say a word later. There's a residents' contact line at number 66. 67, there's a waste and litter plan. And that doesn't just involve on-site, but also off-site. And my client will take photographs before and after to make sure that there's no imposition on Gillingham in the forms of discarded anything, whether in this beautiful park or along the egress routes back to transport points and so forth. And there has to be an access and egress plan which contains measures to mitigate nuisance and ASB by customers who've been to the site. There's plans for protection of children from harm, and then at the end, conditions agreed between environmental protection and the applicant. So these 77 conditions represent a comprehensive code of control for this event, which we are asking you to pass. Can I just delve a little bit more deeply into crime and disorder? Because obviously that is what the police specialise in. The control of crime and disorder is a large operation. Just to give you a flavour of it, at page 88, I'm just showing you who's in charge of it. The person who's in charge overall is Richard Wolford, 30 years in the Met. He was a commander with strategic lead for counter-terrorism and other things. He was a police gold commander, commanding some of the most challenging events in the capital. He was an England football police commander. He was a crowd security and safety advisor for the FA. He's worked across the globe. He's been the police lead on many festivals, and so on and so forth. So I hope you think that the person who's putting their reputation on the line here to deliver a compliant event in Medway is worth trusting. And he is ably assisted by Mr. Galvin, who's sitting here. Again, 30 years in the Met. He was a chief inspector, specialist operation task force, strategic lead for public order, and so forth. So this isn't just something which is put in place by chance. This is taken very, very seriously indeed. Those individuals will be responsible for the delivery of the crime and security plans and statements of standard operating procedures. Just you can see what those are. If you look at page 82, at the bottom, they have to produce the crime and security plan, the search policies and procedures, the policy and welfare plan, and the standard operating procedures, of which there's 12, which cover every conceivable angle in relation to crime. So all that work is done, it's shared with the police, it's discussed through, it's improved, hopefully, with the input of the police, and then finally signed off by the Safety Advisory Group. Security on the site, if you were just to have a quick squint at page 237, I hope that it will demonstrate to you that my client does not take matters. If third column, event, there will be at least 226 security personnel employed in every relevant place, both on and off-site. And if the police want to discuss that, and I rather hope and expect they do. Thank you. And different numbers are identified, then that's the purpose of the Safety Advisory Group process. My client has taken on a new security company, new to my client, called Specialised Security, who are one of the country's leading security providers. They work at all the major festivals in this country, including, for example, Reading and Leeds, which are bigger than this by a very large multiple. And they work for one of the two largest festival promoters in the world. They'll be deployed in the site, they'll be deployed outside in the town centre, they'll be radio connected, obviously to each other, to the control room, and therefore to the police. They'll be policing the pick-up and drop-off areas, stations, and so forth, and there'll be response teams in the event of an incident taking place here or there. My client, through Specialised Security, will be attending quickly. They will discuss any further provision which may be required, so for example, supporting traffic management, exterior perimeter controls, and so forth. These are the sorts of discussions which routinely take place. And I hope really to hear that the police are satisfied with the level of expertise being brought to this, and certainly these individuals and companies would not put their reputation on the line. One of the things mentioned in the police objection is drug control. It's a perfectly reasonable thing for the police to want to consider. So just again to give you a glimpse, if you look at page 85, it says that my client has a zero tolerance policy to the use of drugs and also NOS, which is nitrous oxide. You probably know what nitrous oxide is. It's not in itself an illegal drug. It's actually used by bakers in cake production, but it's illegal to sell it, and my client has a zero tolerance policy to it. And my client will have specific policies for drugs and searching, which will be drawn up in agreement with the SAG and referenced in the conditions. Drugs will be seized and so forth. Crime will be reported, and people found, for example, dealing drugs will be handed over to be dealt with by the police. If you look very quickly at page 113 and 114, find extracts from one of my client's security policies, which deal with prohibited items and deals with, on page 114, the drug handling procedure. There's a zero tolerance approach to illegal drugs. Anyone found in possession will be refused admission and be dealt with according to the protocol, and so on and so forth. This is further described in the drugs and welfare policy, which you'll find at page 269. Page 270, item 4, the Board of Directors do not condone the use of drugs and want to achieve a drugs-free event. Page 271, that will be messaged in every conceivable way. Terms and conditions will be published, that the police will be there, that they will take action, there will be amnesty bins to deposit drugs before you even get to the festival site, there will be searches, and so on and so forth. And you can read the whole of the rest of this. Dealers will be handed over, obviously, for prosecution. And I will leave the rest of that. I should just take you to 273. The drugs policy includes nitrous oxide and former legal highs, which can be dangerous. They're not safe, and they're not necessarily mild either. So my client is taking this seriously, and it's employing the right personnel to make sure that its will is carried through. At the end of it, Kent Constabulary have said that they are likely only to attend on Saturday with local SNT officers on the other days, that may, I don't know, reflect that they're not too concerned about anything other than Saturday. But I do want to make this absolutely clear. Should the police wish to have space in the control room on every day, they are, of course, most welcome to occupy it. And I would also want to make it clear that if what is preventing the police wanting to come on the Friday and Sunday and Monday is cost and resourcing, my client will pay for them in partnership. And I hope that offer is taken in the spirit in which it is intended. My client wants to work in partnership. It's working in partnership with every other relevant authority and agency in Medway to deliver a successful event. Can I then come and just deal with the police objections? And as I've said, that starts at page 72, and my client has delivered a comprehensive rebuttal at page 79. I'm not going to take you to that because you've indicated you've had the opportunity to look at the papers, and it would be rather insolent of me to read you what our rebuttal says. But also, it's right to say that having had that rebuttal, the police haven't put in another document to say that they're still unhappy with any part of the rebuttal. So I leave the rebuttal to stand as it is. But can I make probably 4 points about this police material? Point number 1. Please, could you have a look at page 70? Because it contains hyperbole which has been picked up in your local press and sometimes reflects on the reputation of an event. If you look in the middle of the page, there's a paragraph which starts, ESMP clearly states that SIA and stewards are only responsible for the management and security of persons within the event site, not outside. Well, that's just wrong. I mean, my client will obviously have security outside the site, but pass over that. Balance of probability suggests a 4-day music festival of up to 25,000 persons each day will generate a significant amount of crime and disorder, etc. Well, that's just wrong. And it's misplaced. The Friday night is a classical music event with Catherine Jenkins, capacity of 5,000 people. I'm just not sure how the police believe this could evolve into a 25,000 dance event. The Monday is a community day with children's games, a fairground and the like, finishing at 6. Again, the fear is simply uninformed. There will be a children's disco, but I don't think there'll be 25,000 children, and I'm not sure even if there were, it would create a major security risk for Gillingham. There are 2 days of dance music, one with 25,000, and well, the Saturday night is what you would call dance music. The Sunday night is 80s, 90s, and 2000s popular music. And the Sunday night is just 15,000. And I have to say that all the other authorities are very clear about what is being proposed. It's not very clear why the police are unclear, because everybody on that safety advice group knows exactly what the suggestions are. The second point is this, and I'm sorry if it appears patronising, it's not intended to be. But the police approach seems to be based on a misapprehension about how festival planning actually works. Every festival event involves a planning process which starts many months before the festival and involves cooperation between the organiser and the various statutory agencies involved in a safety advisory group, including the police. There's a national guide which is used by government, local government, police, transport authorities and so forth. It's called the Purple Guide. And chapter 25 of it explains how the SAG works. It's based on risk assessment, management and mitigation. During the event planning process, many issues are canvassed and resolved by the experts around the table. For example, where are the park and ride sites to be? How many CCTV cameras will be deployed on site? How many SIA people will be employed outside the site? What provisions are there for litter collection? And so forth. And this is exactly what is being produced now. Production of material is critiqued, new drafts are produced and eventually signed off. This is standard modern practice. And quite a bit of the police representation says, well, some issues remain to be resolved. Well, of course they do, because the SAG process is months from being completed. So the answer to nearly everything in the police objection is the SAG and the subgroups are progressing very well to time and to plan to resolve all relevant issues. And if you come to the SAG, both the main SAG and any subgroups you want to be on, you'll see professionals working in partnership as they should to resolve all relevant matters, as they are all used to doing for large spectator events. And if you want to raise matters of detail, the appropriate place to do it is in the SAG. And if the Event Safety Management Plan is not signed off, as agreed by all relevant authorities, the event doesn't happen. I think the police have attended a couple of meetings so far. I was told by Mr. Jessup outside that they weren't sure how many they'd been invited to. It's not for my client to invite, that's for Medway, and I'm quite sure it's been done properly. But coming to these SAGs that they're concerned with would be very valuable for all concerned, so we can iron out any legitimate issues. But for example, much of the objection, and you've heard it again from Mr. Jessup already, refers to traffic management. But they haven't been to any of the traffic subgroup meetings dealing with those topics. And the actual specialists in those fields, including your traffic experts, are satisfied. So the traffic management plan, which has to be produced under condition 64, is expected to be signed off within a month from now. To take another example, the police have asked about off-site personnel. And on page 82, we have explained that there are off-site crowd traffic management marshals and event staff with greater detail in the Event Safety Management Plan. They've raised noise nuisance. Well, that doesn't fall within their expertise, but it's been resolved through the SAG process with environmental health. Conditions are agreed, and I'm sure they're not trying to gainsay a statutory authority with actual expertise in noise control. They've raised litter and WC provision, and again, that will be resolved through the SAG in the appropriate way. They've raised this suggestion I've already adverted to, that 25,000 people are going to access this park through a narrow gateway. Well, of course, they won't. The ingress plan, which you can see on pages 109, 110, show there'll be a large number of lanes with steps over that low gabion wall to make sure that people can get in an appropriate manner without any undue fuss. They've raised wildfires. And I have to say, for all of us sitting along here, it's the first time we've ever experienced an objection of this nature in a festival application. But under condition 48, there's a fire risk assessment, and there'll be liaison with the fire authority, as you would expect. Kent Fire and Rescue themselves emailed my client to say they didn't object to the licence. And the council's contractors have said they don't expect or need my client to fence off any areas outside its site. There's reference made to the potential of people camping and perhaps lighting fires, I don't know what, having barbecues. But people won't be permitted to camp. And people coming to see Miss Jenkins are extremely unlikely to be camping over to participate in the following night's dance event, but they won't be permitted to anyway. So the answer, therefore, to much of what the police raise is that this is precisely what the Safety Advisory Group is formed for, and why the Event Safety Management Plan is referenced in the licence condition. Thirdly, my client has not only responded comprehensively to the police, but has also met up with them to go through their objection to see can any of this be resolved. And I'm sorry to say that the police haven't indicated that any of their professed concerns have been laid to rest. And it appears as though the attitude is just to oppose. And I do hope that we'll be hearing something a bit more constructive today, since my client, after today, hopes to be working in partnership with the police to protect festival goers and the community. It's not the usual of the police, I must say, to try to prevent a cultural offer within a council district entirely. It's really the usual role to work in the process to ensure that legitimate concerns are mitigated for. So I do hope that we're going to see a constructive and partnership type approach. Fourthly, there's reference in the police documents to the fact that the centre of Gillingham is a cumulative impact area, and I know you know that it is. And indeed, there's a public space protection order in operation. And this was the last thing the police relayed to my client again when they met. And I have to say this with all due respect, as a ground for objection, that does not appear to be particularly well formulated as an idea. I'm not quite sure why anyone thinks it should have been advanced, even as a make-weight objection. As to cumulative impact, this site, this park, is not in a cumulative impact area. I know of no law or policy or guidance that says that a CIP should influence applications outside the CIP, or that a CIP should be used to block cultural events such as festivals. And it's obvious, I guess, why not? Because the CIP says we've got an ongoing cumulative issue which operates every day of the year, mostly at weekends, whatever it may be. But bring a festival into the outskirts of a town, then there won't be a night on which Gillingham has more security, more eyes, more response teams, etc., to ensure that the event passes off in such a way that there is not a big criminal outflow. I have to say that my client's experience in terms of criminal outflows from festivals is that because of the way these events are policed, both locally and by events teams, these off-site criminal experiences do not materialise in any sort of significant way. Similarly, no doubt there is a good reason for a public space protection order in Gillingham. You don't want people, I'm presuming, drinking within the high street of Gillingham, drinking out there on the street. And if they are drinking out there on the street, then there's statutory powers for the police to walk up and say, I'm confiscating your alcohol, and if they refuse, then that's a criminal offence. That's how a PSPO works. And that will still be in place. But it's not a reason to block a cultural event taking place outside, in a park, outside the public space protection order area. And if it were, you wouldn't get events in Wembley Stadium, you wouldn't get events in Hyde Park, you wouldn't get events in Finsbury Park. All of these boroughs, all of these areas have cumulative impact areas. Boroughs want people to come in, spend money, raise the profile of the area, as long as it's all well policed with proper security and so forth. If there's questions of Mr. Jones, you may want to bring him in. I know I've talked for quite a long time. I hope that he can be trusted to do his job correctly, but there's particular issues. He is here to answer them. But can I just say, in summary, This is where we have got to. The police, by their own admission, have only had very tangential involvement in the work of the Safety Advisory Group thus far. I'm not levelling criticism at them for that. But my client hopes and expects that they will want to cooperate in the event planning process after today, so that a wonderful event can be delivered for Medway, as your Deputy Leader and Deputy Chief Executive have indicated. To this end, the crowd and egress plan, version 1, was sent to Kent Police on the 16th of January. It includes site evaluation, the main pedestrian entrance, the temporary steps that I've talked about, pedestrian management, ingress, circulation, crowd management, venue capacity levels, floor spaces, flow rates, the egress plan, the dispersal, and emergency routes for vehicles. There is a security subgroup meeting, which has been established for the 2nd of February, to include all the parties, the police and the security companies. And there is a CCTV plan, which was sent to Kent Police on the 17th of January, and in the subgroups to come. All of that work continues and will continue. And for all of those reasons, I hope you can have confidence that my client is on course to deliver a safe and successful and enjoyable event for Medway and its... Can I just check whether I've omitted anything? I have glossed over some points because I know that we have an afternoon and just an afternoon to deal with this in. Is there anything I still need to do? No. Well, because we're not going into it. I mean, if it comes up, then I'll reply. Yeah. Thank you very much indeed. Those are my submissions.
Before we move on, my colleague wants to get some water.
I'll just grab us up.
Sorry, sir, I pinched one of the two jugs.
Just going to... Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Colvin. Right, then that takes me to the objectors. And is that going to be you, Mr. Jessup?
Yes, I've got one or two questions. I think PC Hunt may have as well. The first of my questions surrounds transport. Who's best placed to answer those?
As I understand... sorry, this is you making your case. Your questions come...
Oh, the way I read it was...
You're going to do questions. Yes, yes, my apologies.
In terms of...
Please proceed.
In terms of transport, we understood that the original plan, I think it was called Plan A, was to have about 45% of persons travelling would be travelling by train. So on day 2, whereas the 25% capacity, that would be just over 8,000 people travelling by train. We were told this week that there will be no train services from London to Gillingham or from Gillingham to London because of engineering works, and that instead Plan B was going to be implemented, which was to put on buses instead. Can you tell us what are the details of that bus plan? How many buses, for example? Where they're going to pick up from, drop off from, and what sort of times?
I'll get Mr Jones to answer that, but while you're answering it, can you just explain to the subcommittee how postcode analysis works as the event proceeds?
Sure, thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Ben Jones. I'm a director at Last Mile Services and the lead consultant preparing traffic and transport plans on behalf of Stardust. In reference to the question in regard to the rail engineering works, it's correct that engineering works are planned to take place, which will impact the events on the Saturday, Sunday and Monday. So for the Friday, the train service will be operating as normal, but on the Saturday, Sunday and Monday, there won't be train services between Gravesend and Gillingham. So services will still operate to the east, into Gillingham and back east, but not between Gravesend and Gillingham. So when factoring out various meetings with South Eastern Railway, which is the train operator, and obviously we had internal meetings in terms of communications with the customers and what this impact would have on the event and our transport use forecast. So we've looked to implement a special bus service offering bus tickets between North Greenwich and the venue. These tickets are available to pre-purchase for customers, which gives us data on how people are likely to travel for the events. So essentially, we've got no trains operating between London and the event site on the Saturday, Sunday and Monday. But we do expect people to travel very differently on each of the days. So looking into Saturday specifically as the largest capacity of an event, we expect 35% of the audience to travel from London utilising the special bus service. This equates to 8,750 people, which is approximately 88 buses at 100 persons per bus. We will be pre-selling coach tickets from North Greenwich to the venue at timed departures. So customers will purchase a ticket for say 10 o'clock or 10:15 or 10:30, and we're liaising with Transport for London buses in regard to the use of bus stops on Millennium Way at North Greenwich Station for a designated pickup area. So those buses will operate from London, they'll travel down to the site, and they shall unload passengers on Prince Arthur Road, which is included as part of our road closure footprint for a designated area for coaches to drop off and pick up. To touch on Mr Colvin's point around data, and I do really want to emphasise the importance of data, and I'm very conscious that in part of the police representation were concerns that our transport use forecast might be wrong. Our transport use forecast is a forecast. It's based upon assumptions. This is the first year that events are taking place in the park, and whilst I have an awful lot of experience in planning events, I can't second guess every single customer and their travel choices. So the forecasts are based upon a series of assumptions as to how we think people will travel. These forecasts are subject to change based upon an analysis of ticket sales data, so that's postcodes where people are travelling from to the events. Also, a travel use survey will take place for customers, so they'll be able to answer, how are you planning to travel to the event? And we'll also be selling tickets. So that'll be tickets to the designated park and rides so that we can track demand for parking. Tickets to the special bus services, so that will include special bus services from North Greenwich, regional bus services from towns and cities, and a bus service which will also operate from the bus station in Chatham. Am I still on? Yeah, but they won't be able to pre-book that service. So yeah, we'll be really focusing in on the data, and we'll be using that data to update our transport use forecast, which will be shared with the Safety Advisory Group, discussed in the traffic and transport subgroup meetings, and we're happy to be really transparent with that data with police colleagues so that they also have insight on where people are buying tickets from and what that looks like. We're not looking to hide anything in terms of data of our customers, where they're coming from, what information we know, and also what information we don't know, because we want our plans to be really resilient and robust. So, you know, if we have 500 people pre-booking a park and ride, we're not just going to put on 500 park and ride spaces, we'll put 1,000 park and ride spaces. So we've got enough spare capacity to cater for it. And that's just an example in terms of a number for park and ride. So don't dial that back into the actual, because what we're looking at is much more considerable than that. But I hope that answers the question. Any further traffic or transport related things, I'm more than happy to help.
Thank you for that. In relation to the drop-off and collection point, it was originally envisaged that Brompton Road would be the location for that, but now apparently it's going to be Prince Arthur Road. What confidence do you have that that particular road is wide enough to deal with coaches and buses? The police have concerns that it's not wide enough. What's your answer to that?
So we're working with Medway Council Highways officers on the design of the traffic and transport plans. Medway Council Highways officers encouraged us to look at Prince Arthur Road as a location for bus drop and collect. So we'll be looking at a managed road closure of Prince Arthur Road between the junction of Mill Road and the junction with the Army Barracks on what is Wood Street, but Brumpton Road essentially, to allow for a sterile area for buses to unload and load passengers. So in terms of the direct question around road widths, I'm confident that there are sufficient road widths and sufficient space for customers to load onto buses. There will obviously be mitigations in terms of barrier systems and signage so that people can queue easily and then load onto the buses, and that will be quite a considerable operation, particularly on the Saturday, but I'm confident that there is space.
Again, thank you. In terms of the trains that will be running, obviously trains running from Gillingham to the coast, that's not affected by the engineering works as I understand it. In terms of any trains that are running, the police understand that there's been no contact with British Transport Police, so that they are unaware of any event taking place that might impinge on their duties at these. Can you confirm whether that's correct or not?
I can confirm that I haven't yet been in direct contact with British Transport Police, but that's not necessarily uncommon at this stage in the event planning process. The first draft of the traffic management plan, the transport use forecast and management plan, the traffic impact survey and assessment is issued today, and they'll have sight of that document. So those draft documents, which are subject to change, and we'll be working on them in the lead up to the event in consultation with stakeholders, will be submitted to stakeholders today for their comments, and then we shall follow the normal event planning process through the Safety Advisory Group to take comments and amend plans accordingly.
And lastly, from me, in any event, I know Mr. Hunt may have some questions, but in relation to those that will be travelling by car, you've mentioned park and ride. It's our understanding that the four main areas that you've mentioned are the larger areas: Greenwich University, Chatham Historic Dockyard parking, the Pentagon Shopping Centre, and the Brook multi-storey. In relation to Greenwich University, it appears there's been no agreement as yet to use that space. The Chatham Historic Dockyard, they say that you haven't been in touch with them. Pentagon Shopping Centre, they say that have not been in touch. And the multi-storey has limited parking. What can you tell the committee about whether you've got in place a real plan for park and ride?
Sure. And I think this kind of emphasises how fast-paced the plans are updated in the work that we're doing at the moment, which is really putting these plans together. So I'll tell you exactly where we're currently at with park and ride. We are working with Medway Council Parking Services to procure the use of Cronines car park with capacity for 69 spaces, Wharf car park with capacity for 209 spaces, the Railside car park in Gillingham, which will be a park and walk site with 77 spaces, the Gillingham Marina, which is a privately owned site with capacity for 150 spaces. We're looking additionally at the historic Dockyard Chatham's brownfield site H1, which has capacity for in the region of 400 spaces. And just this morning, the event organisers secured agreement for a greenfield site just outside of Rochester with capacity for in the region of 1,500 spaces. So we haven't signed the contracts on all of these car parks as things stand today. The organisers committing that as part of the traffic management plan, we will secure suitable parking capacity for all event days, and which the traffic management plan must be approved for the event to take place. So I hope that that gives councillors confidence that there is a suitable framework in place to kind of govern the work that we're doing. But we're really committed to making sure that we don't have just enough parking, but we've got so much parking that we've got loads of resilience in our plans so that we can also pre-sell park and ride tickets on the event website so that we know how many people are expecting at each of the car parks. But we've also enough capacity for cater for parking on the day. totally accept the local feedback and the feedback from the police that they expect more people to want to drive to the events and park. So from that, we've really sort of doubled down on our searches for park and rides, and the procurement of the private space today gives us a lot of additional capacity. Just to touch on parking while we're on the topic, obviously a concern, again raised by the police, is unsafe and illegal parking. The event organiser is looking to appoint a private sort of lift and shift company which will work with the council's parking enforcement teams to have capability to relocate any vehicles that are parked illegally or in an unsafe way, blocking the highway, for example. So we do take parking really seriously, and we do also really welcome the feedback that the police have given on parking, because that has driven us to ensure that we're looking to provide lots of parking and that we have good mechanisms in place for enforcement. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may jump in just with a couple of additional questions about the parking and about the buses. Just in relation to the parking, you've obviously mentioned various council pay and display car parks with limited availability, such as Cronin's car park, the railway car park, I think the car park at the front here, the Wharf car park. Just in relation to those, quick point, are they going to be closed to general members of the public that aren't using this facility, this event, or are they going to be in addition to those people already using those car parks?
I couldn't answer that question in sort of a definitive, yes, 100% this one's going to be fully closed. But for example, the car park here on a Saturday, Sunday and a bank holiday Monday has a very low level of usage. So the parking services team at Medway have provided us with background usage and given us a price to procure the spaces. So my current interpretation of those contracts would be that in paying to procure the spaces, we have exclusive use of the spaces. But we haven't signed the contract yet, so I don't want to tell you something that isn't 100% true, but I can just reiterate that commitment that we will have guaranteed parking spaces available for our customers. We won't be sort of chancing our arm that car parks are going to be empty. We're going to be guaranteeing that they are.
And if I may, just in relation to the buses and also trains, it would be fair to suggest, if the trains were still in operation, that if people were to leave the event site, if they was to leave early or leave towards the end, or not necessarily leave at the final whistle, then they would ordinarily make their way down to the train station and catch the next available train, of which I'm sure there are frequent trains between Gillingham and London. Obviously, they're now off the cards, and it's just going to be these train services, these bus services. So, how does it work with regards to the bus services? Will the I know it's in the planning process, but will buses pick up people once the event is finished, or will buses leave at certain times, staggered bus departures? I'm just trying to get an idea as to how the buses will work and how the timings of the buses operate.
Thanks, yeah. So in terms of arrival of buses, customers will pre-purchase a time for their bus departure. That allows us to manage demand at North Greenwich. In terms of bus departures, we shall have buses ready and waiting on Brompton Road, where there's capacity to hold 36 buses at a time. So we're ready from earlier in the evening. The road closure will be in place to enable the buses to wait on Prince Arthur Road. Sorry, did I say Brompton before? That was a misspeak if I did. Prince Arthur Road. The buses will be stacked up there, 36 buses from earlier in the evening to cater for early departures. There won't be a timed departure that those customers have to get the bus. We shall have the buses ready and waiting. And as one bus goes, we'll feed another bus in onto Prince Arthur Road to ensure that we've always got buses there ready for the customers. There will be a queuing system set up on Brompton Road within the road closure so that we can manage people into that bus loading system. So it's not just a huge crowd of people and a huge line of buses and no system. There'll be a queuing system managing people onto the buses. We are pre-selling bus tickets at £12.50 for a return ticket to London, which is actually cheaper than a train ticket in normal times. So that'll give us really good data in terms of how many people have pre-booked it. But we do also expect there will be some people who need to take the bus on the day. So tickets will be available for purchase on the day. And if at the end of the night, for example, you've got customers that haven't got any money and they've no other way to get home, we're not just going to leave them stood on the side of the road. They'll be provided a bus service back to North Greenwich.
Okay, thank you for that. We've done some research, if that's the right word. We've been on to the website where I understand the tickets and stuff are all on sale And I know you've explained about the bus service you're bringing down from Greenwich in London to the event site. Well, there's also on your website or on various websites, there's proposed bus services, as I understand it, from locations all over the place. So Dartford, Sidcup, Tunbridge, Bromley, Ilford, Romford, Colchester, Basildon, Southend. It's a very long list of places across the South East region where these buses are coming from. Do you not envisage any concerns about getting the right people on the right buses and the queuing and the waiting and potential disorder that might occur in that holding area or that waiting area for the buses? I'm trying to work out how they're going to get on the right bus.
Yeah, no, it's certainly a risk when you've got a lot of people trying to find the right bus, possibly when they've had a couple of glasses of wine. So ensuring that those plans are robust and it's really clear will form part of the transport management plan. So that, like the barrier plans and the signage plans for that aren't produced yet. So that is a work in progress as the documents are draft, and that's something which we'd work closely with you on the design, or to show you the designs for the sign-off and the approval. But basically, as I would see it, as customers walk up Brompton Road within the road closure area, they'll be channelled into various different queues. There'll be queues for your London buses, queues for your regional buses. Regional buses wouldn't necessarily all be a different queue straight away for every single location, but they'd be put into a holding pen and then fed through when their buses were available. We'd look to utilise bus loading on Prince Arthur Road, and at the junction itself, Brompton Road, Prince Arthur Road, it's very wide there. There's space to load buses. So we'd look to be loading buses on the right-hand side, splitting people out, loading buses on the left. And I appreciate that's a lot of sort of information, and perhaps for those who are less familiar with transport management at events is quite hard to picture, but that's why we have the process of the transport management plan. I can appreciate that from the police's perspective, you want to see exactly what it's going to look like, how many barriers, how many staff, where are the signs, where are the bins, where are the toilets. All that information will be in the transport plan that we'll share.
That completes your questions. Okay, I go to my colleague.
Thank you, Chair. I've got quite a few questions. I'll try and lump some together and then you can push them around, David, if that's okay. Can I just confirm, first of all, your tickets are on sale? So tickets are live. That's normal practice, is it, before you come to licensing and before you come to an event?
Absolutely. Subject to contract, subject to licence, every festival. And it sort of has to be, not least because you need this data then to drive the transport plan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Can you just give me an idea? We mentioned the stewards and security, but say let's pick the Saturday, the 25,000. Can you tell me how many staff will be on in total, not just your security, but how many people will be staffing that whole event on that day?
Maybe can you give us a number here?
Around about 1,500 staff.
And when you worked out your numbers for the event, your 5,000 for the classical, etc., you probably are well experienced. You look at what the take is. How accurate is the 25,000 for that event? Just for example, if you oversell, you can't, can you? So you're going to limit it at the 25,000. But imagine if there's a lot more people want to come, and then they'll turn up in hordes through Gillingham.
So the current ratio of dropout rates for shows such as the Saturday night that you're asking about there vary between 25 and 30% post-COVID. So if we was to limit ourselves at 25,000 tickets, we would see an enormous drop in revenue from on-site activities such as bars and concessions. Pre-COVID, it was accepted practice that your dropout rate could be anywhere from 10 to 15%. So it's correct in stating that the capacity that we have applied for is for the number of ticketed guests on site plus staff.
So you oversell, even though you're only it's not going to go above the 25,000 on that day. Yeah.
Sorry. we will not have more than 25,000 ticket holders on site.
Can you just tell me a little bit about what you mean by local when you say about employment, when you say about the work, the bands, etc.? What's local in your mind compared to ours, maybe in Medway?
Medway. Yeah, so with regards to the local band applications that will go out next week, specifically for that community event on the Monday, we'll be targeting specifically local bands from that data region.
I know, Mr. Garvin will pull me on, will pull me back on this one if I go too far. I'm not going to focus on it, but obviously you would expect us to look at the papers and do a bit of research, and there has been issues with other authorities. And you've got such, you talk, Mr. Garvin, about such a rigorous plan. Obviously those plans were when you presented in other authorities. Have you had the issues with the police in those authorities as you are in here in Medway with regards to objection? Same similar objections? Or?
I've never had a review to any licence that any of my businesses have run. I've been doing this a very long time. To give you a very quick, boring story, I put on my first school disco when I was 13 years old. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I hope that I can demonstrate there's never been a review on any of my licences. Answers your question accurately, sir.
I mean, I've asked Mr. Miller, and his CV says he's put on 4,000 events, and over 3 million people have been through his doors, and he's never had a review.
Yeah, I congratulate him on that. I think my question was around you have had refusals in the past about certain safety refusals in other areas. That was my question.
Yeah,
and I know I'm not going to centre and harp on those at this, but I just wanted to be. My question was where you've had those refusals of doing an event such as in another authority area, was it down to the concerns what the police have, or down to the relationship with the police?
If you could, please, because that's the only refusal.
I think he's had one refusal, and it's me. I'm amazed he's instructed me again. But I can tell you that the police were one of the objectors, but their objection wasn't accepted. It was refused because there was a difficulty about vehicles turning right off the A21 down a country lane, and it was thought that was a main arterial into Bromley, and it was just too much traffic passing that way. And also because when you got to the car park, there was then a long walk up to a field along an unmade track, and the subcommittee just wasn't happy with that happening at the end of a festival event. Those were the main reasons, but it wasn't because it was going to be a criminal exercise.
Can I just focus just a little bit, Chair, on the park and ride? Because obviously the plans have changed since we've even read these papers. So I think I want a little bit more confirmation with regards to what you've actually. I know the transport plan is ongoing, and of course that can change. You've gone and mentioned a few more places there. I just want to be certain, are they confirmed places that you've just mentioned? I mean, Wharf, you might be able to say yes here, but the ones that you're talking about, including the Greenfield site, are they actually confirmed and concrete now? And will, because of the train strike, you will get people coming in cars. There are many residential roads that are resident permit areas, within Gillingham especially. What's your plans? So one, are what you've told us now totally confirmed with regards to your park and ride? And what about the impact on those neighbouring roads around the site?
Sure, thank you. So the local authority car parks are subject to contract. So the contracts are not yet signed, but we have been given a price by the council for those car parks, and in good faith told that they will be available for us to use by Danny Petrie, who's a consultant that's working with us at Last Mile, and he does an awful lot of work here in Medway and works very closely with parking services on lots of local events. In terms of the Greenfield site, Reece will be able to confirm. Reece is leading on the contracting of that site, which has moved forward very quickly over the last couple of days, but I believe that is confirmed with space for in excess of 1,500 vehicles.
I'm looking at the email, actually.
Yes.
I'm literally looking at an email from yesterday. We're happy for you to process the hire agreement. That's the Greenfield site.
Perfect. And then just with regards to the question in terms of access for residential streets, so particularly Marlborough Road and access to Marlborough Road is obviously a really sensitive street with the school, the hospital, residents. That will be protected via an access scheme for local residents. So there'll be a road closure in place with access maintained for residents. Access to the hospital will be possible via York Avenue at all times. There won't be any checkpoints on York Avenue preventing access to the hospital, so there'll be expedient access there. And we'll work with the local authority highways team on any additional soft road closures that may be required to protect access for residents. There are quite a few that are included as part of the traffic management plan, including a couple of private roads that belong to the MOD, so with their consent, so Sallyport Gardens, which is round the back, and then the adjoining road of Sallyport Gardens, which name evades me now. So we will implement soft closures to any roads that are flagged as particularly at risk.
I think my question around that was around the resident parking and the impact of the residents parking in the roads. Parking is prime in Gillingham, and the areas that don't have the resident permit, everyone tends to go to, especially when they want to go shopping on the high street. So when there's events, if there's no trains running, people will come, as you are rightly planning, for more cars to be coming. People will look for those areas to park, including non-permitted areas, which will impact on the residents of Gillingham. And I was wondering what sort of work have you done with regards to parking arrangements around those roads, residential roads?
Well, no, it's a very good point. There is an email knocking around between parking services and ourselves around CPZ, so it's possible that we can consider extending the hours of the CPZ. That work hasn't undertaken as yet, but probably is another good point as to the process. But we'll take it away on the back of today, and if it's possible to extend the CPZ and the Highways Department feel that that would be preferential locally, we can look to include it.
That goes nicely into my next questions that are tied together, I think, is about, you mentioned, Mr. Garvin, that the applicant had spoke to ward councillors. That I'd like to know what ward councillors you spoke to in Gillingham. And I would like to know about the consultation part as well, because actually talking to your ward councillors in the surrounding area, in all the different wards, not just the ward that it boundaries many wards, how far you went on that consultation, because you talk about objections. You only get objections if people really know about what's actually going to happen on that field. So I'd like to know who you actually spoke to and consulted with.
So, if you allow me to pull up the email, because Claire from the Festivals Events Department invited all the ward councillors to 2 meetings that took place, and of which there was only a handful of councillors that actually turned up. Do you recall the email? Did you get it yourself?
Sorry. Okay, so just for clarity, it's Medway Council that approached, is talking to the ward councillors, not so much as the organiser.
The Medway Council representative set up the meetings with the ward councillors on 2 dates. Myself, Sean, our managing director, that representative from Medway Council, and the councillors that wanted to attend the meetings went through the proposals, what was being proposed, what were the event types, the licensing framework, whether they were going to get, any questions from local residents with regards to it. And then with regards to the physical application itself, we followed the protocol, leafleted an agreed area with the council, put out the blue notices and replaced any that were taken down by dog walkers, put the advert in the newspaper, and we made sure that we followed the regulatory and statutory bits and pieces that were put in place.
Can I talk about litter and waste? I think, I've read there, of course, you'll maintain that very well within your site. I'm just interested in how you're going to maintain it on the route to the train station, how you're going to make sure the whole area is cleaned up, ready for, obviously, the high street the next morning, as they'll be opening for business. So I'd like to know, on your document, you say that you do a walking route of cleaning, and I'd like to know where that route and walking route for cleaning will be.
Sure. Once the traffic management plan is fully agreed and approved, we will be looking at the routes that are within the area for ingress and egress, and we pay our waste contractor in one of 2 ways. What we call an internal agreement, so the actual event perimeter itself within the steel shield fencing, And secondly to that, we pay them for external patrols and clear-ups. We met with Medway North, your contractor that looks after Great Lines Heritage Park last week, and we also agreed that as part of what we do, we'll make sure that we litter pick the countryside area. Another thing that we do, sir, in terms of that piece of duty of care, is we take before and after photographs. We present them at the SAG debrief post-event, so everybody can see exactly what we do. It is normal for us to get in the minutes that it looks tidier than when we first left it. As you can appreciate, people drop litter. There's other protocols as well with regards to waste management that we've agreed with Medway North verbally so far, such as we will cover over all of the council bins, put our own bins in place, so it's us that's picking up the waste management bill.
So the zone, you don't have to answer it straight back. So I'm taking the zone we'll take in, the High Street area and the area where people are dispersing. Okay. Can I just ask you about the hospital? Sorry, Chair, I'm there. Can I just ask about the hospital? You said about the consultation with the hospital. Was that you as the applicant that consulted with the hospital? Yes. Okay, so you will know that the hospital is pressured. You'd know we've had some critical incidents at the hospital where they haven't been able to accept only life-threatening A&E admissions. Thankfully, it's not in that at the moment, but they're still, as everywhere is across the country, they're still struggling. So with that consultation, are you saying the hospital was satisfied that if there was an incident, I'm only saying if there was, I would hope you've got good medical facilities within your boundaries, but if there was a serious incident, can the hospital cope with that?
So first and foremost, when it comes to event planning with the NHS, there are a number of people within that you consult with. There's the actual emergency planning office within the specific NHS Medway Trust themselves, of whom we've met with the lead. There is another member of staff that deals with external events such as ours, and then there is the ambulance service as well that are plugged into if there was an incident, where do you take the patients? So that consultation throughout the event planning process is dynamic, and it changes and it ebbs and flows as certain things happen in certain areas, as you rightly point out. We've got our own medical representatives that plug into that. We've got our event team that plug into that. And then on site, as you rightly point out, we have our own provision. A mini hospital, doctors, nurses, a number of private ambulances, and a welfare area as well for non-medical issues. So we've got many layers with regards to the welfare of our customers.
So your risk assessment would take into account if there was a strike on the ambulance service, etc., etc. Okay. I just want to focus just briefly now, just on the crime element, the concerns from the police at the moment, and it's the dispersal stuff I'm concerned about. Mr. Godwin, you were saying that there's a team of security that will go out and around, and they're only limited on what they can do because they're not police officers. So if there was something major, not necessarily kicking off at the train station, apart from the buses maybe there, but the station will be closed. Your SWAT team, or the team that you said out in the van, I might have said the wrong word, but don't pull me on it, they're only going to be able to do so much. And, you know, I know you commented on the police could only do the Saturday, but the police are also struggling with regards to their resourcing, and I say that in a respectful manner. They are struggling. Crime does happen in Medway, and, you know, your residents of Medway would expect the police to attend those incidents pretty speedily. So when they're offering, you know, when you say you'll still have your security, and you never know, even a classical concert, there can be things happen after that, you never know. You know, these teams, to reassure us, how effective are these teams that are going to keep public order in place outside of your venue, i.e. on the way to the buses, on the way to your stops? How are we going to feel confident that that's going to happen?
Yeah. Can we just do this in two parts? As a football supporter, can I just say this, that people leaving festivals are not football crowds. They're different. They're in couples, they're in groups, they've had a lovely day out. It's all just been fun. So sometimes when there can be fear that, oh, it's all going to be awful out there, it normally isn't. And whether you pick up the newspapers or whether you're actually, in this industry from a law or health and safety point of view, usually if there's eyes on the route, people know that there's security here and here and here. The fact that security doesn't have a power of arrest, it doesn't make any difference. They know that they're being watched. But can you give us, or maybe Mr. Galvin can give us just some sort of sense of how these major egress routes are looked at, the kinds of issues which arise? Do you want to, you've heard from Mr. Miller.
Especially on leaving the venue if they're intoxicated.
Yeah.
Because they may be even intoxicated on the way to the venue, which is fine, they're having a nice time, but it's about that element. I'm thinking about when you close of an evening, what can them teams do if there's not enough police around to be able to help?
The security teams they're all SIA badge holders, so they will intervene, they will. We want to work in partnership with the police. As we all sit in here, we need that partnership work for them to step in. If I go back to an event I've done recently, which was with We Are, which was in Upminster, that was 40,000 people. And as rightly said, Mr. Colvin said, these are not football crowds. They are youngsters who just usually get away from the event. At that 40,000 event in Upminster, we had 2 antisocial behaviour in the town centre. The council said they couldn't believe that they only had 2, and that is fact. That was a relationship working with the police and with the security teams, but it's the confidence of having the security teams on the routes that virtually dispels and stops disorder. I understand there's issues within the high street in Gillingham. I fully understand. I read the notes and what was sent to me. That will always be there. I can't do nothing to stop that, but all I can do is reassure the local community with the security officers that are out there and with the response teams. The response teams will respond to any type of disorder. They can intervene, but we need the support, obviously, of the police.
Do you want to add to that?
I'd love to add to that. The show that the gentleman refers to is a show that I founded back in 2012. This is my sister, who's worked with me, for many, many years, and that's our hometown of Upminster. So the fact that that's got such low, antisocial behaviour rates is proof and pudding of the team that have helped build that show, which is the majority of people that are sat here next to me today. So hopefully that gives you some level of comfort in terms of actual results that we've achieved together.
I'm finishing my questions now, Chair.
Sorry.
It was just ending on the point around there are problems already in our high streets, not just in the gym, but in our high streets. And then problems, there'd be people that are not ticket holders and maybe people that are there anyway that may be causing an issue. And I'm just worried about that, how that mixes.
Can I just say this? The first is that I'm imagining that on most nights that Gillingham High Street doesn't literally have police up and down the street. They're responding. Reece is saying, and Ms. Galvin is saying, we can't literally stop local people who are, whatever they're doing, street drinking or getting into fights, doing that. That may continue to happen. But the guarantee you have when the festival is on is there will be people in uniform along that high street. It will be better than it is currently. There'll be better security, better surveillance, better radio contact. Yes. And if the police take the view that for whatever reason there needs to be a higher level of security here or here or here, that's what happens in the SAG. And my client will lay it on.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. My colleague has asked questions that I was already going to ask, like in park and ride and bus park and access to the hospital, consultation with councillors, litter clearance and police resources. Only left me with one thing. I'm concentrating on the classical concert or the opera concert on the Friday night. you're limiting that to 5,000 people. I'm sure with Catherine Jenkins, and presumably she's got supporting acts as well, that's going to be a huge draw. How are you going to actually limit it to 5,000? And will all the other activities on site be ceased during that evening?
Thank you for the question. Appreciate it. So when we're looking at those concerts and what they draw locally, we're looking at previous event ticket data. You mentioned Catherine specifically. She did 2,000 tickets at Moat Park in Maidstone of July of 2022. She sold 3,000 in Malden, and it's our opinion that that's what those kind of concerts draw in terms of numbers.
And what about the other activities on site? Will they be ceased? Your fun fair activities and things?
That's correct. So for the physical site map for that 5,000 capacity event, it's smaller and scaled down, and it doesn't have access to the rest of the site for the larger events. So.
Okay. In the past, we've had classical concerts in the Castle Gardens, as you're aware, and the clientele, shall we say, are more mature, and being polite, and it was more of a sort of a picnic type of event with people bringing their tables and their chandeliers and they're bringing their own wine and things like that. Will that sort of thing be permitted at your concert?
So in terms of the terms and conditions, we don't allow customers to bring in their own food and drink. We will have picnic areas. We will have all of those refreshments available specifically for the customers to make it as pleasant experience for what we agree is a more mature and different age category in terms of its catchment than the rest of the programme across the weekend.
Yeah. But they won't be able to bring their own favourite bottle of red then?
Unfortunately not. We have a very we have a tight set of terms and conditions that are set with regards to customers bringing in liquids, and that's something that's been borne out of security risks in the past.
And what about their own food? Because they're bringing the favourite picnicky things. I mean, presumably you won't have the resources of Marks and Spencer's food department on sale on site, will they?
So with regards to food, we have gone out to 150 local traders of every single different cuisine and dietary requirement for what are 50 spaces that were available. So we'd be very disappointed if we didn't cater to all of the tastes that are out there.
Mm-hmm. But then you're going to have the problem of people sort of queuing up, whereas if they brought their own, they could just go and find a little own spot and put their table out. So that's going to cause a fair bit of queuing, isn't it?
50 food vendors for 5,000 capacity will provide hardly any queues at all. But you raise a very relevant point, Councillor, that if you don't have enough food provision on site, the queues can get out of hand, hence why we look at all of that data and those numbers correctly to make sure that people have a pleasant experience with queuing and the dietary requirements.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you. Can I just find out a little bit more about Stardust, actually? Other than sort of London locations where obviously there's plenty of public transport, could you give me some idea of other places that you've held festivals?
Stardust is a business that was set up in November 2021. We held an event at Lyd Airport that you've heard about today, and we have got this event proposal here. Stardust is made up of a large group of people that have been in the outdoor concert and event business for a very long time, including myself and other experienced partners that have been doing this for around 30 years.
Just tell the council a little bit more about your own experience of operating in different places, whether urban or rural, please.
Essex, Kent, Sussex, the Midlands. I've promoted every major concert hall in the majority of the country, from the NEC in Birmingham to Alexandra Palace in London to all of the academies. I've done outdoor events in a majority of home counties, and the people that we work with to physically construct and produce the events that we put on have also got an extensive CV in terms of procuring and producing outdoor events.
Thank you. Can you tell me how many of the events that you have organised have actually been 4-day events as opposed to 1-day events?
So the event that we referred to in Upminster was a 4-day event. That's still running now successfully. It's got its 10th anniversary this year. It's also normal that I've been involved in sites that would be built and that would run over 4 weekends, so would be 8, event days cumulatively. So I've done it extensively throughout the last 10 years in terms of multi-day events.
Thank you. Can I then turn to the highway representative? A little bit about the park and ride, particularly looking at the Saturday, which is obviously the busier day. The way I see this, people may well arrive over a period of time. It's highly likely that they would all want to leave at a fairly similar time. So my question is, how do you manage that? And do you have the capacity to move that many people at that particular point in time?
Thank you, Councillor. So it's correct that people will arrive over a period of hours, particularly, say, for the Saturday event, which opens at 11 o'clock in the morning. People will be arriving between sort of 11, 4, 5 o'clock, so it will be quite staggered. What will be implemented for the Saturday event in order to manage the departure profile is some systems to reduce the impact. So it won't be like a fireworks event where the last firework finishes and everybody rushes to go home. This event will be programmed quite differently. So Reece might be able to add a bit more flavour, but I'll say what I know. There'll be multiple arenas within the event site itself. So there'll be kind of big top tents where there'll be music being played. There'll be an outdoor stage where there's music being played. And there'll be, I think it's 4 or 5 different arenas where there's music. Those arenas will finish at different times and programmed in such a way with sort of different genres of music to encourage people to leave across a window of approximately an hour and a half. So rather than having 100% of the audience leaving at the end, because that's just a lot harder for us to manage, we like to soften the blow by implementing these measures to encourage a staggered egress. Further to that, to ensure that we can manage the flow rate of people coming out of the event site, the available exit width for people will be constrained. So instead of opening every available fire exit and letting people walk out onto Marlborough Road and down onto Brompton Road, customers will all be channeled to exit onto Brompton Road via 2 available fire exits. They'll then be managed into 2 sets of staircases, so 2 sets of 12-metre staircases are going to be built onto Brompton Road. There's a flow rate constraint on steps of 43 persons per metre per minute, where people will be managed up the steps, down the steps, onto the road, and then there's approximately a 10 to 12-minute walk to all of the different transport options. So whilst on paper it looks like 25,000 people, event finishes, how they're all going to go home, when we really start to drill down into the sort of granular detail as to how many of those will leave between 8 and 8:30, how many do we think will leave between 8:30 and 9, how long does it take those people to exit the event site, walk over the steps, get onto Brompton Road, how long for them to get to where their queuing system is, what does the queuing system look like? It starts to look a lot more manageable, and I appreciate that's quite a lot of information, But then once people do walk those queuing systems, there'll be queuing systems where we can hold people to manage them either onto the buses, onto the trains, across the roads, into the taxi area. There'll be systems at all of those locations to ensure that we're not overwhelmed, and it will be clearly documented within the transport use forecast and management plan what the mitigations that we're going to put in place will be, and that is one of the documents that needs to be signed off by the Safety Advisory Group, so for them to have comfort that our plans are sufficiently robust to manage the numbers that we're expecting to process. I think the other point, just to touch on Reese's point earlier around expected attendance on site, we're building plans for 25,000 ticket holders. It's very common these days that there's a no-show percentage, and the number of people who actually come on the day is sometimes a bit less. And that's just something which we'll kind of factor and work to. So we're working to a worst case, 25,000 people, how do we manage them? And we will build our plans to that worst case because we know we do need to be able to manage them. But all of these other things are what we'll do to reduce that impact, to make it more manageable for us, because we don't want to make it really hard work. We want to do something that really works. So I hope that answers the question.
You're saying that the area of the Brompton Road will be the area where the buses will pick up and drop off, so consequently that will be closed. Have I understood that correctly?
Brompton Road will be closed for public safety purposes. Prince Arthur Road will be closed for the buses.
As this is the main thoroughfare between Chatham and Gillingham, can you just talk me through the route that the traffic will have to take because it can no longer use the Brompton Road?
Yeah, sure. We also did a traffic impact assessment and survey. So a request of the Highways Department was that we undertook a survey so we could analyse how much traffic are we likely to displace on a Friday, Saturday and Sunday. So I think it was the 13th, 14th, 15th, the weekend of. We did a survey where we put staff on the ground to count the number of vehicles travelling on those routes in either direction. And the outcome of that survey was that on the Friday, at Brompton Road, between the hours of 4 and 7 o'clock in the evening, there was 2,038 vehicles travelling in a eastbound direction, 1,753 in a westbound direction, and 619 vehicles utilised Mill Road. When you break that down into like 15-minute blocks, you can start to see, and it's all detailed within these tables, how many people we're displacing. So we feel we've got a good indication as to how many vehicles we're going to displace across the period that our road closures are in for, and therefore we can start to look at what impact those might have on the diversion routes. The diversion routes are yet to be agreed with Medway Council's highways teams, but we have a subgroup meeting scheduled for next Friday to talk about diversion routes. But as things stand, it's likely that impact will be Dock Road, Pier Road, all the way around Canterbury, and then roads to the south, so Canterbury Street, coming round onto, zoom in, the A2. But the diversion plan will be included as part of the traffic plan, and it's likely we'll look to split out the diversion routes, so rather than sending everyone on the same route, we'll try and split some off. We also will be putting in advanced signage. There'll be signage that's installed 2 weeks before the event takes place to inform road users of the event and road closures. There'll be a resident letter drop to let everyone in the local area know about the road closures, and we may also take an advert out in the local newspaper to let people know what roads will be closed and when, just to try and reduce the amount of regular local traffic that's trying to use it as a cut-through on the evening of the events.
I'm sorry, I understand that you know where the stressed areas will be. What I did ask is, have they yet worked out where the traffic which goes between Chatham and Gillingham, where it is likely to actually be routed to? Has that not been worked out yet?
We don't have the diversion plans done yet. The diversion plans are being prepared by Danny Petrie, which is the consultant that works with Medway Council and is working with us on this event. So I can't say, yeah, I've got the plans. I don't yet have those, but they will form part of the traffic management plan.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I just finish with just 2 quick questions, probably for you? Just following on from the Chair's question around the 4 days. Can you just talk me through because you haven't been in Medway, you know, the two questions going through my mind is you could have trialled a one-day event in Medway. I know it cost, you're going to tell me it costs a lot to put up, but I'll plead ignorance here and say I don't know anything about it, and I don't. But you could have done a trial day or one day here first to see how it goes, but obviously you went straight in with a 4-day. So, you know, the chair was talking about those 4 days, and you said you've done them before in one other area. And I suppose my last question is why Medway lid was successful? You never had a review. So what brings you? What made you decide? I can tell you many wonderful things about Medway, but I'm asking you why you decided Medway.
I'll answer the 4-day question first. The 4-day programme is something that we as a business have been looking to put into a Kent borough for a very long time. You're absolutely right that the commercials don't stack up for a one-day test event in any shape or form. It was our intention to put together a broad, diverse programme where each day can cater for different tastes. You'll note that the first day on the Friday is a lot smaller than the biggest one on the 4-day weekend, which allows you to iron out any difficulties with a much smaller event. So that's a sensible step in our eyes, and we think that it's the right thing to do to put on that 4-day weekend in the same way that you will do for, you know, your Dickens events or your Christmas events. They're multi-day events. Why Medway? We've spoke to a number of boroughs that we're speaking to with regards to their different green spaces. Our chairman, as you may know, bought the marina in Gillingham about 18 months ago. We sat down with the council and the leadership team at the start of the process before investing heavily in this project, and they were arms wide open for business such as this. They're the kind of people that commercially and that we want to work with. We want to be in a borough that wants this style of culture, this offering for its residents, where we're going to be welcomed with open arms. And the people from the hospital to the council, you know, even the dog walkers on the park have been brilliant. And so far, you know, our choice in coming to the right borough is proving the correct one.
Okay, so then that takes us on to number 6, and I think that is you, Mr. Jessup.
Yes, can I say at the outset that, like the applicant, the police team here, and there are 4 members of that police team, I don't count myself as part of it, but 4 experienced police officers who are not only experienced police officers, PC Hunt knows the area extremely well, and they're also experienced licensing officers, and PC Hunt in particular. There's a suggestion that, I think the quote was, that the police are objecting for objecting's sake, or that the objections are somehow trivial. They're absolutely not. The police have got major concerns, if I can just crystallise what they are, as categories. The first is transport. It's a wide area, and some of the questions have dealt with that. But the concerns that obviously come from transport, if transport isn't correct, that's the delivery of the people and the taking away, that is often called the dispersal, are obvious. And you know that what they are. They could be issues of safety, public safety. They could be issues of disorder, with people hanging around if they don't get to their right location, with nuisance parking, all kinds of things that have been alluded to. They're not trivial, they're serious, and they're very much a matter for the police as a responsible authority as they may be matters for other responsible authorities, where the police have to speak for themselves as they find it. And that's the first category. The second category, well, I hope to provide a little bit of detail on, as to explain out the police case, is crime and disorder, because of the locality of where this festival is positioned, right next to an area that has a high crime rate. Now, crime and disorder, as you know, far from being a trivial objection or objection for objection's sake, as it's been suggested, is actually, according to the guidance under the Act and the authorities, as you know, very much a matter which the licensing authority should take the advice from the police, or the advice from the police is important on those issues on crime and disorder. So that's the starting point. Just another preliminary point on that before I go into dealing with those two categories, transport and the crime and disorder, is to say this: the Safety Advisory Group is there to finalise, to dot the I's, cross the T's. You're the body, as you well know, charged under the Act from making the decision about the licensing objectives. You've got to have sufficient detail before you. It's all right saying, and it's quite legitimate to say, well, that's going to have to be decided, that will have to be signed off. But what we're talking about here, what we say we're talking about here, is large chunks of detail that don't enable you to fulfill that duty of deciding whether this application will promote the licensing objectives. Large chunks of detail, and I'll be coming to that detail missing, because that's the theme of our representations. So it's all up in the air, we say. Let's deal with each issue, and if I can try and explain what I mean by that with some examples. Transport. We say that if this isn't got right, there will be safety issues, possibly disorder issues, and crime issues. We're told, for example, that 45% originally were going to be travelling by train and 10% by car. Only recently that's changed. Of course, there's no criticism there. I don't know when it was known about the planned engineering works, but let's say that's only just been found out. So that's been changed. And so now we know there are no services on the train from London to Gillingham, Gillingham to London, in between Gillingham and Gravesend. We know there are train services going east. But where's the detail as to who's going to be travelling to the coast on the train still, and how many people will use, we're told, bus services to bridge the gap between where the engineering works are, so take it at the other side of Gravesend. Where are the numbers and details? Because it's only, we say, it's only by having the numbers that you can assess the safety risks. I can give you an example of that. If we're talking just, for example, of trains, if we know the numbers, and not just the numbers, and there was a very good question about dispersal and timings, are people leaving at once? I accept it's not just the numbers, but it's also knowing, are those numbers happening all at once? If we don't know the numbers, we can't possibly assess, or you can't possibly assess, the safety risks involved at the train station. Can that train station on those lines at that day, with anything else that's going on that the train services are aware of going on, because they'll be having their own planning, can they accommodate those people at that time? If they can't, what's going to be the slowdown of queues? What's going to happen to the queues? Where are they going to queue? Where are they going to be held? Trains, as we all know, do have a potential safety problem because they're train stations. And so all that detail is important. It may be for a matter for the Safety Advisory Group, but it's often the case that there's more detail at this stage. It may need signing off with the T's being crossed, but it's often the case that there's more detail for you to make your decision at this point. Now, the issue was raised about the days. It can't possibly be the first day, and there was a lot of talk about it being a classical opera concert. It's obvious that the main cause for the police is day two, to a lesser degree, but simply day two because of the nature of the event. It was accepted that events like that inevitably will have people who are intoxicated, maybe arriving intoxicated, maybe during, maybe after, but also a drug problem that's accepted, or a level of drugs. So that's the real problem. It's day two. Day 3 and 4, to a degree, because of the numbers, well in excess of the 5,000 on day 1, but it really is day 2, 3 and 4, and probably in that descending order, with day 2 being the most concern. But in terms of transport, if it's changed now so that 45%, that's 8,750 people who were coming by train. Now, some of those will obviously be maybe still going by train because they're going towards the coast. But what numbers? One must presume that the majority of those are going to, because we're told it's about 2,000 going to the coast, the majority of that 8,750 now can't go by train. They've got to go somehow by bus. But you're not told any details as to where those buses are going to pick off, the times. There's one example of not having that detail causing a problem, you may think, and it's this. What about ejections? What about people who are inevitably ejected? They will be at those sorts of events. The sheer number of people ejected for all kinds of reasons, if things are being done properly, for having drugs on them, for having things on they shouldn't have on them, for being overly intoxicated, for disorderly behaviour, for all kinds of things. There will be crime committed within those parameters, the perimeters of that event. What are the procedures to deal with those people if buses are coming at certain times? Are they going to be hanging around? In terms of the dispersal being staggered, it's all right to say we're going to iron that out, we're going to put the flesh on the bones on it, we're going to stagger it somehow. But you need to know now how many people at what time, on what basis is it estimated that if they're watching one particular part of the concert, that they're going to leave at a certain time, whereas the others are going to leave at another time. Where are they going to leave to? Are they going to go to those train stations or the buses? And if you don't know that detail, you're not able to assess what the safety risks are. And the police have real concerns that it's a plan just nowhere near complete at this stage. And at this stage, it's premature to ask you to say that it will promote the licensing objectives, particularly in terms of transport. So that's our point on that. The second point is the locality of this next to an area that has high crime rate. Mr. Colvin, quite right to say that this isn't in a cumulative impact zone, but we've never said it is. But it's right on the doorstep of it. And that is relevant if the people that are coming to this event on that doorstep are going to be going through that area where there is a high crime rate. Of course, as a matter of common sense, that's relevant. To suggest otherwise is not really grappling with the realities of it. If you have an area, and you know your area better than I do or anyone else do, you know your area, it's in that zone. There was a public space of protection order as well. It has its problems. I'm not going to lecture you about the problems you know about, but it's a matter of common sense. You've got thousands of people descending onto that area who are perhaps intoxicated and maybe, because you don't know, left without direct travel at that time because the buses haven't come or there weren't enough of them or they couldn't get down the new road because it was too narrow. All the things are going to be sorted out, you're told, at the Safety Advisory Group, but you don't know that now. How can you assess the real level of those people going through that area if you don't know how many, how long they're going to be hanging around, and in what state they're in terms of are they agitated because they can't get home, or they've been told the next collection of the bus is going to be a long time, or they can't get in the train station because there's too many people leaving and the train station won't let them in. So we say that because of that lack of detail, you can't properly assess that. But what you can assess is this. It's just a matter of common sense that that's going to increase that level of crime. If this was in the cumulative impact zone, so we're very aware it isn't, the test would be very different. It would be a presumption that they didn't get the licence unless they showed they weren't going to impact negatively on the zone. But you've still got the problem of people using that particular area and going into an area where there's already that high level of crime. So we would say that is a major area that they can't deal with. In terms of doing the necessary legwork to provide you with an assurance that they're looking into safety, you might wonder why British Transport Police, given the importance of the trains, particularly as people still might want to use the trains, and they might want to get on a bus and get on the trains when they can get back on the train around the engineering site, why British Transport Police haven't been consulted, because they would be responsible for ensuring that there's no deaths or serious injury on the trains because too many people are trying to use it at one point, or at least be consulted so they can plan how they're going to manage that. And that would spill out, obviously, away from the station into the outside of the station if you've got crowds not being allowed onto the station. There are all kinds of complex things that an operator would need to liaise with the police with about that, and they haven't done that. And so putting that all together, we say they are genuine concerns. It's not objection for objection's sake. The police are a valuable source of advice on crime and disorder. We say both those two issues, the second one obviously because it's about crime, but the first one as well, transport, could well lead to disorder if you've got too many people dropping their cars off or not knowing where they're going. It's a recipe for disaster at this stage. We say it's premature, not enough early work has been done, and it's a bit, it could be very likely to be, in terms of transport, chaotic. And without the details, you can't be assured that it won't be chaotic. Obviously, PC Hunt is here to answer any questions specifically on those issues, and that's an overview, not the whole. I haven't repeated what he said in his representations, because I don't want to waste. I don't want to take up too much of your time unnecessarily. But he's here to answer your questions.
PC Hunt, is there anything that you want to add at this point?
Yeah, if I may, just to, I hope not to tread on Mr. Jessop's toes, but just to add a couple of points that I feel relevant to add, and if I don't add them now, I may not get a chance later on. So just one observation would be that you're not being asked to authorise a licence for a classical opera event on day one, or a dance event on day two, or an 80s, 90s naught event day 3, and a family fun day 4. You're being asked to licence a 4-day event for up to 25,000 people each day. And the reason I mention that is because plans can change. Whilst this year the plan is to have Catherine Jenkins and 5,000 people on day 1, and the dance event day 2, and so on and so on, this licence will be in place next year, and those plans can change. So next year, this could be a dance event on day 1 for 25,000 people. It could be a dance event on day 2 for 25,000 people. And the reason I mention that, Chair, is just to highlight that point. We are not, we're not asking you to, they're not asking you to grant a licence for a Catherine Jenkins concert. They're asking you to grant a licence for a 4-day music event for up to 25,000 people each day. And those changes could bring with them increased risk in the future. So that was the first point that I wanted to make. The second point was just to touch upon I know Mr Jessup explained that we've got some considerable experience of police in the Medway towns and police in the Gillingham town centre area. And I know from previous licensing meetings that we've all been in, that you know about the SIP and the problems that the High Street has. But I used to be a High Street police officer for approximately 5 or 6 years prior to joining the licensing team some years ago. So I am very, very familiar with the difficulties and the experiences in the town centre. Gillingham town centre, as per your statement of licensing policy, has higher than acceptable levels of alcohol-related crime, alcohol-related antisocial behaviour, alcohol-related hospital call-outs, ambulance call-outs, hospital admissions, domestic abuse admissions, etc., etc. And just to touch on what Mr Jessup has already said, whilst it isn't, we accept this event space is not in the SIP. It is not in the PSPO area, but it's less than 50 yards away. There is every possibility. I know on this occasion, most of the crowd is going to be going the other direction and going down towards the bus stops. But let's not forget, next year, there may not be a cancellation of train services. Next year, there may not be rail works. So next year, there may be anywhere up to the 8,750 people going to Gillingham train station to go to London, and the 2,500 people to go through Gillingham High Street to go to the coast. So that's in excess of 11,000 people going through our cumulative impact area, which has already got those problems of which you're well aware. So I just wanted to make that clear to you. I'm just going to gather where I am in my notes, so forgive me if I go quiet for a sec. One thing that Mr Jessup didn't touch upon, and I'm not necessarily going to discuss my statement or the additional evidence that we're no longer be relying on today, but I did make loose reference to it in my initial representation, so I think it's only fair to discuss it ever so briefly. There was, as Kent Police licensing, I think it would be wrong if we didn't do some background checks and some due diligence on Stardust Festivals Limited. And we became aware of the event as explained and as discussed down at Lyd. That's convenient for us because it's a Kent postcode, it's a Kent police force that would have policed that event. So understandably, I've made contact with my colleagues down in the east of the county and just asked for their general thoughts as to how the event went, how they felt the operator dealt with the event and so on. And there were some identified failings, which I have made reference to in my initial representations. Those are failings such as one of the prohibited items in the was the NOS canisters. I know we spoke about NOS canisters today. My understanding from speaking to my colleagues as part of that process was that at the end of the event site was littered with tens, hundreds, if not thousands of miniature NOS canisters, balloons, and on occasion really large NOS canisters. They were all apparently on the banned list, so all apparently not to be able to be smuggled into the event site, and yet the event was littered with them, or seemingly littered with them. There was mention, as there is in this event safety management plan, that people found with such items would have those items confiscated, or people found with drugs would have those items confiscated and would be ejected from site, or perhaps wouldn't be allowed into site, one or the other. The officers that I spoke to advised me that there was evidence that they was having those items seized, but were allowed to remain on site, so operating in breach of their event safety management plan, or in that particular aspect of their event safety management plan. There was a suggestion that the CCTV body cam conditions were not always applied to. So I think the reason I raise that, Chair, is whilst I appreciate that Stardust Festivals, the applicant, are going to be submitting a load of documents to SAC, and the Safety Advisory Group are going to be giving their opinion and approval on those documents, what is the point in having that procedure in that document if it's not going to be followed in reality? If they're not going to abide by some of the elements of those plans, as we believe was the case in the event down in Lyd. That is something that we have raised as part of the consultation period with the applicants, and we're led to believe that that was just the previous door company, the previous SIA company. We don't use them anymore. We've learned from that. We'll move on. But how can, at this point in time, we don't have the confidence that the applicant will abide by all of these documents. I hope that explains. I've probably waffled on. I have nothing further at the moment, but I just wanted to get those points in before I didn't get the opportunity to say it again.
Thank you. Mr. Colvin, obviously.
I don't have any questions.
You don't?
We also went a lot further than the representation. I thought we'd done. Let him say his piece, but I will just take an opportunity to reply to some of those other things. I don't have any questions to ask.
Thank you. Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a question about the transport? Can you just clarify that you've got concerns around the station? I'm going to come onto the station because there's some issue. I'll come onto the station in a moment, but I'm talking about the transport element. Obviously, some of our questions were around that, the concrete plans for transport. Are your concerns mainly because of the strike on that on that over a weekend, or is it a general concern around the lack of clarity and total planning around the the park and ride and the transport and the way that people are going to walk to the station? Is that more your concern rather than is it the strike event going on, or the not strike event? Sorry, I'm too used to strikes, but the planned maintenance or engineering work, whatever's going on that weekend. What is your main concern of that, of the transport? Would it change if it wasn't the engineering, and if it was more structured? Would you have a different view?
I think the fact that there's engineering works probably means there's going to be less people using the trains, and that's why there's provision for the buses. That has a knock-on effect for concern about detail in respect to the buses because of the strike. But, so to answer your question directly, if there wasn't a strike, there'd be more people using the trains, so that would increase the concern over the use of the trains. I think it's the lack of detail, whether you're looking at buses or trains, how the concerns that may come about because of people using the trains, that many people, or that many people using the buses. How the plans to deal with those possible consequences in terms of safety, disorder, timing, where they're going from, in what areas do they drop off, how many people at the train station, how many people getting their buses, where they're going to, is that near an area of crime? So that kind of detail to assess that, or is it in an area where the road's too narrow? That kind of thing. Are there going to be enough buses? Are going to be people stranded? So it works both whether there's a strike or not, I think.
Mr. Hunt, can I ask you about Gillingham train station? I understand, obviously, Gillingham train station has got its issues. It's had just recently it was classed as one of the train stations with the most antisocial behaviour in the Kent area. It was all in the press. So I do know there's often British Transport Police outside of an evening. Obviously, that's a concern for you. Have you had conversations with the BTP about the event yourself and spoke to them about their concerns and not being approached, etc.?
Yeah, so just to update you where we're at with that, I've, in the last couple of weeks, been making or trying to make some inquiries directly with the train station. with Gillingham train station itself. I've also been trying to make inquiries with South Eastern Trains, just to seek their views, to see whether they believe their facilities are up to scratch, if they're suitable, whether they need to lay extra things on, etc., etc. They have been extremely hard to get hold of and speak to the right person, and I've found that I've been passed from one department to the other that hasn't been able to answer those questions. The second part of your question was around BTP. I have spoken to our colleagues in BTP. I believe our nearest depot, if that's the correct word, would be down at Ashford. They were unaware of the event. They made some inquiries on my behalf with their ops planning department, if that's the correct term. But the planning department that deals with things from a BTP perspective, they made those inquiries on my behalf, and they fed back to me that the planning department is unaware of any event scheduled to take place up at the Great Lines Park in Gillingham. So I hope that answers those questions. We did try to make those inquiries and bottom it out, but they was all none the wiser.
I think I was just, thank you very much for that. It was just that clarity around the recognition that obviously there is issues at Gillingham train station with regards to ASB and other issues regarding that. Could you, if things could be different with regards to, if there was elements of this plan that you could negotiate and decide and work together with, are Kent Police able to resource this event on this weekend? I mean, looking at resources, I know it's a bit out of your hands, but from a resource point of view, the applicant's saying that they would pay. From the resource point of view, and I know that isn't what your argument is today, it's purely around the other elements you spoke about, but if there was an agreement or if things were a bit more tighter and a bit different, would you then be comfortable to resource the event, and with Kent Police working very closely with the team in their control room, etc.? Or don't you think you could overcome them elements with regarding what you've got in front of you now?
You asked that question directly of PC Hunt. I think, yeah, if you're content with me to answer it, unless you want him to answer it, in which case he will. But the police concern is about the locality of it, and so that's unlikely to change. But of course, they're willing to see more detail to look at it. But at this stage, they don't have that, and they're not in a position to say that they think it will promote the licence objectives for the reasons we've said. They would have continued concerns about whatever plans are in place, bearing in mind the locality of it. But it may be that the proposals somehow get away from the fact that people are going to be within that particular area. It may be that the plan takes them away from that. But in terms of the train stations, that is a concern, and it's a concern that BTP or the specialists within that area don't know about it. But if they did know about it, we're just not in a position to know, I think, because we're so far away from knowing enough details to know whether it would be safe or not. So I don't know if that answers the question.
And just the final one on that then, you said about locality. It is purely around the locality with Gillingham, with the SIP and other areas. You're not against it, and I'm not saying this to move it somewhere else straight away, but I'm saying that it's not about having events like this in Medway, it's around the place that they've chosen to hold the event. That's the issue. You said about the ongoing issue, obviously that's a licensing decision about granting licences, etc., and conditions of licences. So, your concerns around the numbers and everything else is a conditional, is something that committees look at, not necessarily objectors. But, with more detail, or what it seems to me is there needs to be some more discussion and actual talking, which I know you have done, I've seen the notes, but if the working relationship was better, there may be more faith in the, am I right in saying more faith in the process? You would be more, I know you're going to look towards your brief for that, but you'd be a little bit more content if you had because the applicant is saying you're not turning up to some meetings. I'm not saying you, but you know you haven't been at some of those meetings, and you know in the past I always know that there has been. You have always, you know, police have always attended important meetings like these. So, you know, do you think it's instead of just striking them off for years on end? You would agree that if there was a way around it or conditional way around it, that you wouldn't turn away a provider that could enhance the economy. That's what I'm trying to say. You're not just objecting, as the applicant have said many times. You're not objecting for objecting's sake. I think that's what I'm trying to clarify.
The concern with regards to where the kind of event it is, the numbers of people there, particularly day two, is going to remain a concern for the police in terms of crime and disorder because of where it is, the locality. So I think that stays part. Now, to answer the second part of your question, which is whether there could be a negotiation that might change their view, if there were more detail about the elements of transport and dispersal, that might change the police's view on that. They may say, well, there's now a concrete plan. We know how many people exactly are going to use the train station. We've liaised with BTP. They've got a plan. That won't be unsafe. We can rest assured that no one's going to die or be injured on our watch. We've negotiated. We've got the detail. That could change. But the clear instructions from all of my team has been, we just do not feel that even if we got to that stage of more negotiations, that the sheer numbers and the type of event, particularly on day two, would lend itself to promoting the licensing objectives in relation to crime and disorder in that locality because of that locality and because what's going on in that locality. And can I just, in relation to that question, just clarify two things. My understanding is that the applicant is saying that they will fund for police to be in the control room. I don't think they're going to fund the resources on public land, and this is not a Section 25 of the Police Act because it's special policing powers. This is external, so the police would have to make sure they could resource that. I don't think it is any suggestion that the applicant's going to play for the resources outside. In terms of, I'll be corrected if there is a funding proposal. In terms of meetings, it's right that I say something on their behalf in relation to this. I don't know if it is being suggested they just haven't turned up the meetings. I'm not sure Mr. Colvin actually said that, but I think that it's right to say that as a fact, there was the first Safety Advisory Group meeting. PC Hunt was there, president of that. He says that there was very much a cursory introductory meeting and no details were discussed. He was aware that there have been meetings thereafter. I think he's now aware, but he wasn't invited to any of those, nor were the police. So I don't think the police were out there, not because they chose not to go, but I understand it was because they didn't know about it and they weren't invited about it. And so the first time, I know the applicant, Mr. Colvin, conveyed this to me, as he's right to do so, on their behalf, was taken back a little by the fact that they've had the safety advisory groups. I don't know how many have been, 2 or 3. The police weren't there, and then they get representations. Well, of course, the police are entitled to make representations. They've done so, and they've done so fully. But they just didn't know about it. They weren't invited to those early groups. But I just needed to clarify that on those 2 issues. Thank you.
Thank you. That's just answered the question that I was going to raise, so I'll pass on. So we come to the point of each, the objector and the applicant, speaking their last pieces. Would you like to go first? And I will leave it to Mr. Colville to go last. Yeah.
keep it very brief because you've just heard from me.
Yes, I
I
do
think you-
appreciate that.
You know what the concerns are. I think I've hopefully spelled it out with some clarity. That's not to say that the things that I don't want the PC Hunt to be upset with me that I didn't cover everything. The whole point was I know you've read it and I don't want to repeat. I just wanted to highlight those two main areas. That's not to lessen the importance of the other issues that PC Hunt raised. So you've got it all in writing. But for us, that's what it's all about. There isn't enough detail. It's not enough just to say the SAG will sort that out, because you need that detail to determine whether this application now, today, will promote the licensing objectives. And we ask you, on the basis of not having that detail and the locality where it is, to refuse the license. We have proposed, if you were against us on that, a one-day event. We understand that that's not commercially, the applicant's position is that's not commercially viable. And they have actually said that today and said that to PC Hunt as well in a meeting this week. PC Hunt has been meeting them, by the way. You went to see them this week. And there was debate about the representation. So there has been proper progress and proper engagement. I don't want it suggested, it's not accepted at all, that one, we're trivialising it, two, we're just objecting for its sake, or they're not working together. They are working together. They've just got genuine concerns about this. Of course, that'll be a matter for you. But you should take note of what their concerns is, we say, in relation to crime and disorder. Unless I can help you specifically. That's really all I need to say about the case.
I do have a few things I want to go through, having listened to what's been said. My client has been dealing with Medway, its officers, its members, its statutory authorities, its commercial team for 6 months. It's done literally everything asked of it. It's consulted, it's engaged, it's held meetings, it's supplied plans, and so forth. It's also invested enormously to get this festival underway. It's a huge undertaking involving the appointment of large numbers of experts across their different fields. You've seen 2 of them today. And we're now at a point at which you've got to decide, I suppose, as a licensing subcommittee, whether you really want to trust to this process, which is just the usual process which happens on hundreds of sites across the country, or whether you prefer to say no and don't want to do this at all. How would you approach that? Well, you'd approach it in this way. You'd bear in mind that under Section 18 of the Licensing Act, you are to take the steps appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives. That is not to say that you know that you will be eliminating every single risk. If it meant that, you'd never grant a license for a pub. You would probably never build a housing estate. You'd never build a road, because the ordinary activities of humankind come with risk. And that's why the statute doesn't say must be satisfied that there can be no risk. You're simply there to ensure that appropriate steps are taken to promote the licensing objectives. The second thing I guess you'd bear in mind is that there's a presumption in the Licensing Act in favour of things happening. Parliament wanted things to happen, wanted people to have businesses, wanted people to enjoy culture. And so objections which are made have to be evidence-based. And today you haven't heard any, incidentally. But they have to be evidence-based to ensure that you're not stopping things which can reasonably be permitted, which otherwise you might want as a local authority. And you'd also, of course, have to look at evidence to see whether you were making a decision which could stand up in court, because a court would always look at, well, what's the evidence for this alleged harm? And thirdly, I guess you'd want to consider the national guidance, which supports live events of this nature for all the reasons which I outlined in my opening submissions. and you'd ensure that any intervention on your part was proportionate so as not to deter events, using the language of the draftsperson, which are valuable to the local community. And here you know that there isn't objection within the local community. There isn't objection from any other officer. Festivals provide a different sort of challenge, sometimes from pubs or from off-licences. When the Olympics happened in London, I can tell you that the licences weren't applied for 1 month before each stadium event on the basis, well, of course, by that time all the data will be known and every I will be dotted and T crossed. Of course, that didn't happen because sensible people don't behave in that way. Licences are applied for suitably in advance. And indeed, festivals mature and develop, and you can't always know in 2023 how the festival's going to be in 2024 or 2025, and so you create a framework. And this argument, which you've just heard, which is you can't grant a license until you're across all the detail, was an argument which was certainly prevalent 10 or 15 years ago, but has long, long since disappeared from hearings of this nature. It's almost like welcoming a long-lost friend to hear it put in the way it's just been put to you today, because it's not how festival planning happens in the UK. You can't possibly wait until every detail is known about before granting a license, because he's got to create a festival, he's got to spend the money, he's got to hire the contractors, he's got to sell the tickets, he's got to apply for the road closures and the TROs, etc. You apply suitably in advance. If you apply before the SAG process has started, someone might say, well, you haven't even started the SAG process, and if you apply too late, everybody is under impossible pressure commercially, logistically, and so forth. So the way it goes, and I don't mean to lecture, and I certainly don't mean to disparage the way it's just been put to you by police, is you would really ask yourselves these questions. One, has a competent and experienced team been assembled? Because if it hasn't, it doesn't matter what they do, it just won't go well. Has a competent and experienced team been assembled who've all got careers and reputations to lose if what they promised you is going to happen doesn't happen? And I felt a little bit lazy, as many, many, many questions were asked of Mr. Jones here. And I would just venture to submit that you will not find a more competent and experienced person who he does, I think his company does about 200 events a year. And please Google to find out whether Last Mile is some sort of disaster case where they speak to committees and then what they say is going to happen doesn't happen. You won't find that. So looking at the answers that you've had from the professionals that you're dealing with, do you think this is a competent and professional team which can be relied upon to deliver this event in accordance with the licensing objectives? I'd submit yes. Secondly, have competent partnerships been assembled? Because every large spectator event in this country is delivered in partnership with the appropriate agencies. Answer, yes. There are safety advisory groups overseen by your enormously experienced festival and events teams. And those partnerships are working, the SAGs, the subgroups, and so forth. I'm told, actually, that the police did come to one of the transport subgroups. It would be good, given listening to what they've just said, that they were engaged enough to come to all of them, because that seems to be where their concern rests. Thirdly, is a competent framework being established? And we've shown you the first part of the Event Safety Management Plan, which shows the 29 separate documents which have to be prepared and approved by all the relevant experts for this event to take place properly. And we've delved a little bit further into crime and disorder and shown to you the 12 or 13 standard operational practices for crime and disorder, which again have to be passed and which will be overseen prepared and overseen by this man and his partner here. So you've not only got a standard framework, you'd always see this for a big festival, what you've been shown here. It's a competent framework, it's tried and tested. My client is not trying anything from left field, and has explained to you that what it's doing on the basis of full transparency. Fourthly, and importantly for you, do the conditions which have been offered to you give you sufficient control over what is going to happen? Give you, by which I mean Medway Council. And there are conditions which are very, very full. It's not just there'll be an event safety management plan. There's 70 or 80 conditions covering every single aspect of this event. And I have to say that if my client had been lax about this or glib, then there would have been objections from all sorts of responsible authorities. And you might just want to ask yourself, why is it that there's only one authority that's come here and said this is not enough? Nobody has suggested any other conditions. And I did point out that it's usual in events of this nature, at least for an authority that's got a representation, to say, well, look, if only these conditions were applied, then. And it's like Her Majesty's opposition, whose constitutional obligation is to oppose, not to construct, not to see what can be done, not to see how we can make this event, which everyone in Medway appears to want to have happen, but to oppose. But you're entitled to ask yourself, do the conditions provided give you sufficient control? And the fifth question is, can this event happen at all unless all matters are agreed? And the answer is no, it can't, because the event safety management plan has to be signed off. And I can tell you the idea that the licensing subcommittee is the body which has to sign off the event safety management plan, or 90% of it, or whatever is being suggested, is just not the law, and it's not the guidance, and it's not the practice of any authority in this land. So you're being asked to do something really quite unique. And so I do say again, the answer to all of this is, if Kent Police Licensing have an issue, please come to the SAGs and let's talk it through. Ms. Horan tells us that their working relationship with Kent Police Resourcing is very good. And she actually asked the question, well, what do the police do when Gillingham are at home? And there's all these people kicking around Gillingham. What do they do on fireworks night? I mean, there are big events in every borough, and it's part of what a police force does to have to police that. But my client is prepared to make appropriate financial contributions to keep people safe. Just going through a little bit of the detail, it's being said, well, you need all the numbers, how many people are coming by this mode and through that car park and that car park in order to be able to assess the risk. I hope that Mr. Jones convinced you that would be a rather silly thing to do. You create a plan and then you test the plan by reference to the ticket sales data and the transport booking data, so that you work towards a situation where you can be very confident of how people are going to access and leave the site. And then you flex it to ensure that if you're out and more people go by this or that mode, there is enough provision. And this is not the only festival, I can tell you, across the UK where rail engineering works happen. It routinely happens for festivals that there are rail engineering works, and the idea that there are replacement buses, they're all planned in carefully, it's absolutely standard. And indeed, if you really did have to have every number of every person, etc., you wouldn't have festivals in this country at all. So the practices which I've described to you are the ones which are developed and which are reflected in the Purple Guide. So that was the first point about data and evidence. I would just turn this round. If the police want to say, I think they said it would be a recipe for disaster at one point. It's quite an extreme thing to say about someone who's put on 4,000 events, or a company that puts on 200 of the major events in this country, the horse trials, the big football matches, the big golf tournaments, etc., the biggest festivals. It's quite an extreme thing to say. The people sitting before you are the cooks creating this recipe for disaster. There's no evidence to support that at all. It's just hyperbole. But if evidence is needed, it behoves the objector to provide it. The second part was a locational point, which is there's a cumulative impact area next door. Well, someone who's going to street drink in Gillingham is going to street drink in Gillingham. I know it's not just street drinking, but there's quite a bit of that in the appendix to your Statement of Licensing Policy, which explains the origin of the CIP in Gillingham. But what we can say is, A, we've told you, and it hasn't been gainsaid, that the level of crime exiting festivals is very low. They're a jocular set of people who've had a lovely time and they're now trying to get away. You don't get, it's not like, you know, Millwall playing Sheffield Wednesday and fights in car parks all over Deptford. It's not like that. They're just young people who've been having a nice time and a dance, and now they're going home. So the record is not that you get terrible ASB after music festivals. Secondly, there will be more security on Gillingham High Street, particularly on the Saturday and Sunday nights, than any other night of the year. They may not be wearing policemen's helmets, but they will be Security Industry Authority licensed people radioed up to the event control room, who in turn will be radioed up to the local police. And this fear, which has been expressed as a fear, is completely unevidenced. And if it were true that there were routinely terrible fights and things after music festivals of this nature, you would know about it, it would have been said. It's not true. There's no evidence before you could make a decision about it at all. And if we've reached a point in this country where you can't have a festival in a town or a city because there's already crime in a town or a city, we won't be having festivals. What should be happening is for the police to say, look, these are deployments currently in Gillingham. We think if you have this festival, we might need this or we might need that, and the parties can sit together and work it through. There isn't an occasion where Mr. Miller has sat down with the SAG and at the end of it they said, well, no, you're being unrealistic about this. We can't actually have this festival at all. It will be worked through because we're dealing with professional people who work based on experience and trust. It said they may be intoxicated, but where's the evidence that people are going to stream out of this festival so intoxicated they're going to get themselves into fights? And if at the end of it, there's a question, is Medway a place where cultural events can happen? The answer hopefully is yes. And what you have to do is take the steps appropriate to make sure that they do happen. In the officer's, as it were, supernumerary submissions to you, he again said, well, there could be 4 events up to 25,000 persons per day. I'm not sure whether that is the actual concern. And all I can do is assure you that what's in the event management plan is what is passed by the Safety Advisory Group and what there will be. Catherine Jenkins, I don't think, is going to turn into a house music performer and try and get 25,000 people in. There will be opera, and there'll be a small number of thousands of people there. I don't think there's going to be aggravation in ASB at the Toddlers Disco on the Monday. We do have to try and approach this on a realistic basis. The officer took the opportunity to go into Lyd, which was a bit disappointing, because I thought we had a ruling. But if I can just tell you very briefly that at Lyd, Kent Police said that the violence at Lyd was pretty much non-existent. The focus was on people enjoying themselves and having fun rather than getting into trouble. There were 2 arrests on the site. One, a trader who refused to leave when their trailer wasn't up to scratch. The police had to be called. And one person who was possessing drugs with intent to supply. Detained, arrested, handed over to the police. Kent Police said the biggest impact on their police was that their police response team had been retained on duty, which meant that 40 hours of overtime had to be paid. That was it. Thirdly, there was no suggestion by anybody the licence should be reviewed or that the event shouldn't be repeated. Kent Police said the bars worked really well, and the single incident which took place, that was the trader, was resolved really quickly. The council licensing said they had no real concerns in terms of alcohol sales, and the bars ran really well. Nobody seemed overly intoxicated. British Transport Police said there was no staff assaults, everyone was happy and jovial. Now that's a pretty fair, I hope, conclusion about Lyd. There were people taking NOS on site. I've seen the control room sheets from Lyd. There was a full security operation in effect. There was an amnesty bins, as there are in all festivals. Both males and females were detained and handed over to the police for any drugs-related behaviour. 39 people were evicted for drugs actual or suspected. There was a drug safe containing 343 items, demonstrating that my client was doing all that it said it was going to do. And in the end, there were 10 medical incidents for substance misuse out of 15,000 people attending. Police confirmed, although they were asked, that they wouldn't remove the NOS from site because it's not an illegal drug. I'm afraid that, as you know, walking down your own streets, NOS is a prevalent legal high in every town. In this particular festival, it was in a rural area, and the SAG had signed off Harris fencing on one side of the site, and there was a different security company in place, and it seems that some NOS was introduced through the Harris fencing. Certain of the authorities knew about it, but it wasn't conveyed to my client's control room. But my client has looked at that, and in Medway, it's going to have 3 meters high steel shield around the whole site, which is very expensive but very secure. And it's changed its security company to probably the best known and best security company in the country, which has a reputation to lose. So I'm sorry, but it's raised. And I would hate it to be left with the thought that my client is cavalier on something about which it has zero tolerance, and there will be zero tolerance here. And then some of the later answers were about people coming by car because of the rail strike. All I would say about that is that my client's known about a potential rail strike since November, as have the authorities, and has been planning on that basis. But was contingency planning, because the activities of the union have been known about for some time, has been contingency planning on that basis since October. And if the police had been at the transport subgroups, which they know are happening, they would have discovered professionals who specialise in this field, plus your highways officers, talking about precisely this, contingency planning on the basis there may be rail issues going one way. It's not 45%, it's 35% from London, 10% from the east. That will continue. And they are perfectly satisfied with what is proposed. More importantly, if there was still an issue in the minds of your expert advisors about transport, there would have been a representation about transport, and there has been no representation at all. And so I come back to where I started, which is, are you satisfied with the framework, the conditions, with the personnel you've got in front of you? Have you, when you've probed it, tested it, have you been given answers which tell you that you've got a professional organisation which is delivering in concert with Medway, in partnership with Medway and its officers, to make sure this is a safe event for the people of Medway? And the answer is yes. Can I also just add that there are always safeguards written into licensing. You can review a license. The event doesn't have to have taken place. If suddenly my client has some kind of aneurysm and decides not to be a professional and to do this on the cheap, or sacks its advisors, or the plans are insufficient, or decides to run the event even though the event safety management plan has been has not been signed off, there's a remedy of review. There's a remedy of summary review if there's a danger or risk of serious crime and disorder. Only the police can bring an application for summary review, but they can do it. You can stop the event literally, pretty much immediately. There's closure powers if there's risk of crime and disorder. You have injunctive powers if my client is going ahead with this in breach of condition. And of course, the site is owned by Medway Council. And if Medway Council is not satisfied that this event can pass off safely, then Medway Council, as the freeholder of the land, has the ultimate say on who comes on it. So I do hope that you feel I'm not asking you to find yourself 51% happy with this event, although it would be enough. I'm asking you to find yourself 100% satisfied that you're going to have a joyous event for Medway, which will be a credit to you and a credit to my clients, and will be the benefit of Medway residents, workers, traders, musicians, and also to the officers with whom my client is working to make this event a success. Thank you very much indeed for listening to us.
Thank you, Mr. Colvin. So my colleagues and I will now discuss what we have heard. I think bearing in mind the lateness of the hour, that it would be better if this decision comes to you in writing in due course, which I think is an option open to us. That is correct, isn't it? Yes. So I'm sure you probably all would like to go home at this hour. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.